Googy morning. I'm Riley Soliner. I'm not Vacation Jason. I am, but I'm not. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully we do something kind of fun, but also kind of, I don't know what this is yet. I like to read, trying to be a better reader. And part of holding myself accountable is reading to you. Hopefully, maybe that'll motivate you to read something maybe you wouldn't read normally. Googy morning. I don't really feel like being Vacation Jason right now. I kind of don't like the very serious Riley Soliner version of Googy morning, but I like that we're breaking the format nice and early so that the show can become more than just me doing my clown character. Clowns are very important to me, but still a student of the art and of comedy in general and of doing a live comedy show. So I just feel like I haven't mastered how to synthesize my sense of humor with feelings of, like how to make comedy out of all the things that are going on and what I'm observing. And so maybe it's not the time. Maybe it's not my place. So I thought it would be nice to do something a little different with this time. And if you go to PlanetScum.live, you'll notice that the donate to Planet Scum button has changed to a donate to Project Okra button. And so, all the money raised for the show is actually, we're not even going to filter it through the Planet Scum PayPal into a good cause. I'm just asking you, this would be a great time to donate to a great cause. I don't know how many people are live in the show right now, but I know that, wow, okay, there's a solid 43 people here. Thank you for being here. Look, if you go to Project Okra, you'll see that there's like different amounts of money that they mention that they can do different things with. So if you haven't heard of it, it's an organization that brings professional chefs to Black trans people to cook them a home cooked meal. And, hey, there we go, right there. Donate to that. They say that they can cook a great healthy meal for a trans person for $90. There's 43 of us. If we all donated $2, that's a meal to someone who could really use a meal. So if you're feeling like what we're accomplishing today, whatever that means, is worth your time, I would recommend, even if it's a small amount, even if we all together donated a small amount, it would be going to a great cause. There's 60 people watching right now. If everyone donated $1, that would exceed the very low bar, the goal that I've set right now. That would make me feel good. And I'll be sure to donate as well. So What are we doing today? We're going to read a book called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder. I don't want to waste too much time before getting into it. Here's just presently how I think this show is going to go. I'm going to read. The chapters are short. These 20 lessons, they're all pretty concise. And maybe after a chapter or two, we'll have a coffee break. We'll have a snack break. And if you're in the Planet Scum Discord, you can ask for an invite and you can come join. And maybe we'll talk a little bit. I would like to keep it on topic, but if there's something else you want to talk about, maybe we could talk about that for a few minutes. But we're going to get right back to the book because I would like to read the whole book. Seems like a good time to read a book about tyranny. I got a big coffee here. This was full. I'm about I want to say 60% through this coffee. So we could have a coffee break. We could also have a snack break. Maybe you'll find out what's in this little bowl. Maybe you'll find out what's in this little bowl. I'm not going to tell you yet. And I got a water too. Shout out to Tazo Tea, I guess. And then, okay, last thing before I start reading On Tyranny, I want to tell you about how I learned about this book. Kind of a funny story. Before the lockdown, this was a couple years ago, I guess, but I was part of an email. I was on an email subscription. It's called the Blacklist, I think, where if you just look out, sometimes they'll say things like, hey, we're offering $40 cash to whoever comes and sits in the audience of this talk show today. And I didn't have much to do. So I stood in line, got this envelope with $40 in it that I wasn't allowed to open until I left. So I just kind of had to stay there. And it turns out I was in the audience for a Scandinavian talk show called Skavlan. And I was in a bad mood just because life had gotten to me that day. And I was in New York and I needed $40 really bad. So it's not easy to, be in a great mood. And I noticed everyone around me was in such a great mood. And here's why. It's because I was surrounded by Swedish tourists and they were all so happy. Their quality of life, their just exuberance, their optimism. I wish it were infectious that day. Christ, I'm drinking coffee and I'm nervous. I don't wish infection upon anyone. Let's get through this story. I'm watching Skavlan in the studio. I'm one of the only English-speaking people in the audience, and this woman comes up to me and starts speaking Swedish. I think it was Swedish, and she says a long, long paragraph of Swedish at me, and I just have to go, I'm sorry, I don't speak the language. She goes, oh, I'm so sorry. You look like this journalist that we know, and we were going to invite you to come talk to the people backstage or sit up front. And I wish there was some way to be like, yeah, I am that journalist. That didn't work. But the show kept getting stranger and stranger because everyone was so happy. I was in my crummy little mood, and the show starts. I'm the only person who doesn't understand what's going on because Skavlan is speaking directly to all the Swedish tourists. And then the first guest comes out, and it is the Prime Minister of Norway. It's like, wow, this is really special. And it's not like an American talk show where they play games and they keep things moving, but I don't know what language it's in, but there's clearly a long, deep discussion about democracy and politics going on. And it was cool just to be there for that. And then Timothy Snyder comes out and they switch to English and they start talking about tyranny. And I found it on YouTube today. You can go watch Skavlan, Skavlan. Oh my God, Sean, thank you for donating $30. That's Thank you so much. Skavlan and Timothy Snyder start talking about this book, which had just come out, I think, in 2017. And it's great. You can look it up on YouTube. It's a very concise. He's very clear with his words. And then Kim Cattrall comes out. And now it's a discussion between the three of them about Kim Cattrall's new show where she portrays a female president of the United States. They're talking about Sex in the City. They're talking about female sexual liberation. It's so strange. And then Roger Waters comes out from Pink Floyd. They don't even let him on American television anymore because of the way he speaks his mind. It felt very special to be there and witness all of this happening. Like just a long extended conversation between these four special people and Skavlan, who brought them all together. And it was such a special moment. And I got paid to be there. I got paid $40. I used that $40 to buy On Tyranny. And I haven't read it in a long time. It's been, I guess, 3 years. So I'm happy to read this to you. And I'm happy to read this to myself. And I'm happy to raise some money for the Okra project, especially the day after a tyrant that we all know just made it less safe for LGBT people in our country to exist. So if we can even just put some food on the table for some vulnerable people who could use some relief, that would be nice. So with that, I'll check in with you guys maybe once I finish the first chapter. There's a little forward, as most books have, and then we'll just check in after these chapters, okay? So this is the prologue. It's called History and Tyranny. History does not repeat, but it does instruct. As the Founding Fathers debated our Constitution, they took instruction from the history they knew. Concerned that the democratic republic they envisioned would collapse, they contemplated the descent of ancient democracies and republics into oligarchy and empire. As they knew, Aristotle warned that inequality brought instability, while Plato believed that demagogues exploited free speech to install themselves as tyrants. In founding a democratic republic upon law and establishing a system of checks and balances, the Founding Fathers sought to avoid the evil that they, like the ancient philosophers, called tyranny. They had in mind the usurpation of power by a single individual or group, or the circumvention of law by rulers for their own benefit. Much of the succeeding political debate in the United States has concerned the problem of tyranny within American society over slaves and women, for example. It is thus a primary American tradition to consider history when our political order seems imperiled. If we worry today that the American experiment is threatened by tyranny, we can follow the example of the Founding Fathers and contemplate the history of the other democracies and republics. The good news is that we can draw upon more recent and relevant examples than ancient Greece and Rome. The bad news is that the history of modern democracy is also one of decline and fall. Since the American colonies declared their independence from a British monarchy that the founders deemed tyrannical, European history has seen three major democratic moments. After the First World War in 1918, after the Second World War in 1945, and after the end of communism in 1989. Many of the democracies founded at these junctures failed in circumstances that in some important respects resemble our own. History can familiarize and it can warn. In the late 19th century, just as in the late 20th century, the expansion of global trade generated expectations of progress. In the early 20th century, as in the early 21st, these hopes were challenged by new visions of mass politics in which a leader or party claimed to directly represent the will of the people. European democracies collapsed into right-wing authoritarianism and fascism in the 1920s and 30s. The Communist Soviet Union, established in 1922, extended its model into Europe in the 1940s. The European history of the 20th century shows us that societies can break, democracies can fall, ethics can collapse, and ordinary men can find themselves standing over death pits with guns in their hands. It would serve us well today to understand why. Both fascism and communism were responses to globalization, to the real and perceived inequalities it created, and the apparent helplessness of the democracies in addressing them. Fascists rejected reason in the name of will, denying objective truth in favor of a glorious myth articulated by leaders who claimed to give voice to the people. They put a face on globalization, arguing that its complex challenges were the result of a conspiracy against the nation. Fascists ruled for a decade or two, leaving behind and intact intellectual legacy that grows more relevant by the day. Communists ruled for longer, for nearly 7 decades in the Soviet Union, and more than 4 decades in much of Eastern Europe. They proposed rule by a disciplined party elite with a monopoly on reason that would guide society toward a certain future according to supposedly fixed laws of history. We might be tempted to think that our democratic heritage automatically protects us from such threats. This is a misguided reflex. In fact, the precedent set by the founders demands that we examine history to understand the deep sources of tyranny and to consider the proper responses to it. Americans today are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, or communism in the 20th century. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. Now is a good time to do so. This book presents 20 lessons from the 20th century adapted to the circumstances of today. On tyranny. Okay. Quick coffee break. Can we get that little coffee break thing? Okay, coffee break's over. Lesson number 1. Do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want and then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do. Anticipatory obedience is a political tragedy. Perhaps rulers did not initially know that citizens were willing to compromise this value or that principle. Perhaps a new regime did not at first have the direct means of influencing citizens one way or another. After the German elections of 1932, which permitted Adolf Hitler to form a government, or the Czechoslovak elections of 1946, where communists were victorious, the next crucial step was anticipatory obedience. Because enough people in both cases voluntarily extended their services to the new leaders, Nazis and communists alike realized that they could move quickly towards a full regime change. The first heedless act of conformity could not then be reversed. In 1938, Adolf Hitler, by then securely in power in Germany, was threatening to annex neighboring Austria. After the Austrian chancellor conceded, it was the Austrians' anticipatory obedience that decided the fate of Austrian Jews. Local Austrian Nazis captured Jews and forced them to scrub the streets to remove symbols of independent Austria. Crucially, people who were not Nazis looked on with interest and amusement. Nazis who had kept lists of Jewish property stole what they could. Crucially, others who were not Nazis joined in the theft. As the political theorist Hannah Arendt remembered, when German troops invaded the country and gentile neighbors started riots at Jewish homes, Austrian Jews began to commit suicide. The anticipatory obedience of Austrians in March 1938 taught the high Nazi leadership what was possible. It was in Vienna that August that Adolf Eichmann established the Central Office for Jewish Emigration. In November 1938, following the Austrian example of March, German Nazis organized a national pogrom known as Kristallnacht. In 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the SS took the initiative to devise the methods of mass killing without orders to do so. They guessed what their superiors wanted and demonstrated what was possible. It was far more than Hitler had thought. At the very beginning, anticipatory obedience means adapting instinctively without reflecting to a new situation. Do only Germans do such things? The Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram, contemplating Nazi atrocities, wanted to show that there was a particular authoritarian personality that explained why Germans behaved as they had. He devised an experiment to test the proposition, but failed to get permission to carry it out in Germany. So he undertook it instead in a Yale University building in 1961, around the same time as Adolf Eichmann was being tried in Jerusalem for his part in the Nazi Holocaust of Jews. Milgram told his subjects, some Yale students, some New Haven residents, that they would be applying an electrical shock to other participants in an experiment about learning. In fact, the people attached to the wires on the other side of the window were in on the scheme with Milgram and only pretended to be shocked. As the subjects thought that they shocked the people they thought were participants in a learning experiment, they saw a horrible sight. People whom they did not know and against whom they had no grievance seemed to be suffering greatly, pounding the glass and complaining of heart pain. Even so, most subjects followed Milgram's instructions and continued to apply what they thought were even greater shocks until the victims appeared to die. Even those who did not proceed all the way to the apparent killing of their fellow human beings left without inquiring about the health of the other participants. Milgram grasped that people are remarkably receptive to new rules in a new setting. They are surprisingly willing to harm and kill others in the service of some new purpose if they are so instructed by a new authority. Quote, I found so much obedience, Milgram remembered, that I hardly saw the need for taking the experiment to Germany. Okay, that's lesson 1. We're in for a ride, folks. We're doing it. Small coffee break. Yeah. If you feel like joining in on the conversation, maybe reflecting on what I'm reading, go to the Planet Scum Discord. Jess or Hex will be there to DM you a link to bring you in. I think I'm going to read chapter 2, and then maybe we could talk about what we've learned so far. Chapter 2, Defend Institutions. It is institutions that help us to preserve decency. They need our help as well. Do not speak of our institutions unless you make them yours by acting on their behalf. Institutions do not protect themselves. They fall one after the other unless each is defended from the beginning. So choose an institution you care about, a court, a newspaper, a law, a labor union, and take its side. We tend to assume that institutions will automatically maintain themselves against even the most direct attacks. This was the very mistake that some German Jews made about Hitler and the Nazis after they had formed a government. On February 2nd, 1933, for example, a leading newspaper for German Jews published an editorial expressing this mislaid trust. This is a long quote here. We do not subscribe to the view that Mr. Hitler and his friends, now finally in possession of the power they have so long desired, will implement the proposals circulating in Nazi newspapers. They will not suddenly deprive German Jews of their constitutional rights, nor enclose them in ghettos, nor subject them to the jealous and murderous impulses of the mob. They cannot do this because a number of crucial factors hold powers in check, and they clearly do not want to go down that road. When one acts as a European power, the whole atmosphere tends towards ethical reflection upon one's better self and away from revisiting one's earlier oppositional posture. End quote. Such was the view of many reasonable people in 1933, just as it is the view of many reasonable people now. The mistake is to assume that rulers who came on to power through institutions cannot change or destroy those very institutions, even when that is exactly what they have announced that they will do. Revolutionaries sometimes do tend to destroy institutions Revolutionaries sometimes do intend to destroy institutions all at once. This was the approach of the Russian Bolsheviks. Sometimes institutions are deprived of vitality and function, turned into a simulacrum of what they once were, so that they gird the new order rather than resisting it. This is what the Nazis called Gleichschaltung. Thank you. It took less than a year for the new Nazi order to consolidate. By the end of 1933, Germany had become a one-party state in which all major institutions had been humbled. That November, German authorities held parliamentary elections without opposition and a referendum on an issue where the correct answer was known to confirm the new order. Some German Jews voted as the Nazi leaders wanted them to, in the hope that this gesture of loyalty would bind the new system to them. That was a vain hope. All right, class. Can we think of an institution currently under threat? I can. How about the post office? We gotta support our national post office. No takers for joining the stream yet. That's perfectly okay. Look, this is heavy shit. You know, some of it going over my head because I'm not a diligent student of history. This is part of the learning process. We practice lifting heavy stuff. That's how we get stronger. Weightlifting. We don't want to cower and crumble whenever we hear the word Nazi. We want to stand up to them. That's how I feel. Okay. Beware the one-party state. The parties that remade states and suppressed rivals were not omnipotent from the start. They exploited a historical moment to make political life impossible for their opponents. So support the multi-party system and defend the rules of democratic elections. Vote in local and state elections while you can. Consider running for office. Thomas Jefferson probably never said that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, but other Americans of his era certainly did. When we think of this saying today, we imagine our own righteous vigilance directed outward against misguided and hostile others. We see ourselves as a city on the hill, a stronghold of democracy, looking out for threats that come from abroad. But the sense of the saying was entirely different. The human nature is such that American democracy must be defended from Americans who would exploit its freedoms to bring about its end. American abolitionist Wendell Phillips did in fact say that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. He added that the manna of popular liberty must be gathered each day or it is rotten. The record of modern European democracy confirmed the wisdom of these words. The 20th century saw earnest attempts to extend the franchise and establish durable democracies. Yet the democracies that arose after the First World War and the Second often collapsed when a single party seized power in some combination of an election and a coup d'etat. A party emboldened by a favorable election result or motivated by ideology or both might change the system from within. When fascists or Nazis or communists did well in elections in the 30s or 40s, what followed was some combination of spectacle, repression, and salami tactics, slicing off layers of opposition one by one. Most people were distracted, some were in prison, and others were outmatched. The hero of a David Lodge novel says that you don't know when you make love for the last time that you're making love for the last time. Voting is like that. Some of the Germans who voted for the Nazi Party in 1932 no doubt understood that this might be the last meaningfully free election for some time, but most did not. Some of the Czechs and Slovaks who voted for the Czechoslovak Communist Party in 1946 probably realized that they were voting for the end of democracy, but most assumed that they would have another chance. No doubt the Russians who voted in 1990 did not think that this would be the last free and fair election in their country's history, which, thus far, it has been. Any election can be the last, or at least the last in the lifetime of the person casting the vote. The Nazis remained in power until they lost a world war in 1945, the Czechoslovak communists until the system collapsed in 1989. The Russian oligarchy, established after 1990 elections, continues to function and promotes a foreign policy designed to destroy democracy elsewhere. Does the history of tyranny apply to the United States? Certainly the early Americans who spoke of eternal vigilance would have thought so. The logic of the system they devised was to mitigate the consequences of our real imperfections, not to celebrate our imaginary perfection. We certainly face, as did the ancient Greeks, the problem of oligarchy, ever more threatening as globalization increases differences in wealth. The odd American idea that giving money to political campaigns is free speech means that the very rich have far more speech, and so in effect far more voting power than other citizens. We believe that we have checks and balances, but have rarely faced a situation like the present, when the less popular of the two parties controls every lever of power at the federal level, as well as the majority of state houses. That's a little different now, but it still applies generally. The party that exercises such control proposes few policies that are popular with society at large, and several that are generally unpopular, and thus must either fear democracy or weaken it. Another early American proverb held that where annual elections end, tyranny begins. Will we, in retrospect, see the elections of 2016 much as Russians see the elections of 1990, or the Czechs the elections of 1946, or the Germans of 1932? This, for now, depends on us. Much needs to be done to fix the gerrymandered system so that each citizen has one equal vote, so that each vote can be simply counted by a fellow citizen. We need paper ballots because they cannot be tampered with remotely and can always be recounted. This sort of work can be done at the local and state levels. We can be sure that the elections of 2018, assuming they take place, will be a test of American traditions. There is much to do in the meantime. So we just saw those elections in Georgia, the voter suppression, the malfunctioning digital machines. And some people are saying that is a playbook for the 2020 elections, right? Did you see that? Taking a look at the comments for a sec. Oh, thanks, guys. Again, if you feel like joining the Planet Scum Discord, you want to talk to me, you want to talk about what we're talking about. Oh, what is the snack? Okay, quick snack time. In the red bowl, walnuts. Have you ever noticed that a walnut kind of looks like a brain? Brain food. healthy oils that lubricate the functions of your mind. We have Allie. Would you like to join Googy Morning and talk to me for a moment?
Hey, how are you,
What's
Jason?
up, Allie? How are you?
Long time no see. I'm good, pretty good-ish, as can be.
Yeah.
I thought about it, and then I went, no. But I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm all right. It's a beautiful day, and I like to read, and I'm appreciative that people are joining. And by the way, Allie, do you want to plug your show real quick?
Yeah. So I have 2 shows at the moment. Tomorrow night at 9 p.m. GMT +1, which is 4 p.m. EST, I think. I have a show called Post Performance, which Jason has been on. If you want to go back and look at that episode, it's a show that we try to recreate the green room from a comedy gig, and we've got a bunch of comedians hanging out talking shit, basically, and it's fun.
Yeah, it is fun. Thanks for having me on. That was a good show.
Thanks. Yeah, we're delighted to have you, and would love to have you back, especially for a live show eventually when we're allowed to do live shows in front of people.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd
What's on your mind today?
I don't know. I'm just trying to think, because I spend a lot of time in America, so yesterday's news kind of really fucked with my head a good bit, and I kind of always worried about that. But then I had to stop and think and check myself and just think, fuck, I have one thing, you're talking about the Okra project today, which is for Black trans women. So there's people who exist on the intersection of 2 identities that just amplify everything, and that's really a scary thought to me. I just can't imagine what trans people of color are going through right now with the extra levels getting attacked on 2 fronts like that. And I just wanted to, anybody watching, and you know any trans people of color, just reach out to them and check on them. I don't care how strong they seem, because trans people, you may notice this, we're very, very good at seeming strong and putting on a brave face out and say hi and just check in on them and see if they're doing okay. And thanks for fundraising for Okra. I thank you on behalf of all trans people, because I have that power. That's totally out.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Let's move on from this awkward joke.
I don't know. Feels like literally the least I could do, you know?
Yeah, that's what I've been doing, a lot of BLM stuff the last few weeks, because even from over here, it just feels like the least I can do. You know what I mean? I think that I'm kind of heartened. I don't know what you, but I'm heartened to see everyone is just, there's just a line has been drawn. Everyone's just, and it's sincere. It's not virtue signaling. People are shutting up and listening to people in positions less privileged than them, and they're just trying to do their best. So even at this darkest time, we're seeing the best of humanity as well.
It's yeah. I don't have anything too profound to add, but I think just the practical nature of the COVID quarantine, plus everyone being fed up already with the way things are, and then just a singular moment for everyone to just kind of be aware of all at once caused such a spark, and I feel like I'm already seeing concern, because I read Twitter all day, that it's starting to slow down. And that is, I don't know if that's manufactured, people are still protesting, but maybe the powers that be are not showing the protests as much. But to keep the pressure on, to keep awareness raised, and to keep, efforts alive to do something, feels like we just can't go home again, as good or bad as we may have done in the past. It's like, okay, I don't know.
Yeah, but I think that I mean, there's the natural news cycle, and it's kind of coming out of the natural news cycle. But what's actually really heartening for me to see is that we've seen a whole new bunch of people move to action, and they're still in action. And the main thing is we gotta not burn out, because activism burnout's a real thing. Go do something fun every now. Look after yourself, bit of self-care, whether it's skateboarding or something. Find some joy at the same time. Stay angry, but find some fucking joy. Like
that's very good.
Like what's a bit of Scavlan, man?
Oh, yeah.
I love that show.
You know Scavlan? Yeah, he's a great host. He was really good at keeping the conversation going. He was awesome.
Yeah. I saw him via YouTube. Like he gets the weirdest. Like I think, who did I see? Did I see Laura Jane Grace of Against Me? He interviewed. Like he interviews the best people as well. Like,
I'll look into that.
Not give a fuck.
I'd like to see that.
Goes. It's like it's a proper chat show rather than a late night show, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I was really interesting. That's why
they put smart people on.
It left such an impression on me.
They put smart people on TV in Scandinavia.
Yeah, I'd like. Yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
It was really good, Ali. I'm gonna get back to the book, but I so appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and look after yourselves, everybody, and look after your friends. See you soon.
Thank you very much. That's Ali. If you want to put in the chat a link about post-performance pints, that's a podcast and a show that I've done, that I've been on. I had a good time. It's a good concept, and it was a good little window into the Ireland comedy scene, which I don't know anything about until I learned about Ali's show. So thank you, Ali. We're up to number 4. Take responsibility for the face of the world. Okay, all right. I'll try. What does that mean? The symbols of today enable the reality of tomorrow. Notice the swastikas and the other signs of hate? Don't look away. Do not get used to them. Remove them yourself and set an example for others to do. Okay. Life is political. Not because the world cares about how you feel, but because the world reacts to what you do. The minor choices we make are themselves a kind of vote, making it more or less likely that free and fair elections will be held in the future. In the politics of the everyday, our words and gestures, or their absence, count very much. A few extreme and less extreme examples from the 20th century can show us how. In the Soviet Union, under the rule of Joseph Stalin, prosperous farmers were portrayed on propaganda posters as pigs, a dehumanization in that in a rural setting clearly suggests slaughter. This was in the early 1930s as the Soviet state tried to master the countryside and extract capital for crash industrialization. The peasants, who had more land or livestock than others, were first to lose what they had. A neighbor portrayed as a pig is someone whose land you can take, but those who followed the symbolic logic became victims in their turn. Having turned the poorer peasants against the richer, Soviet power then seized everyone's land for the new collective farms. Collectivization, when completed, brought starvation to much of the Soviet peasantry. Millions of people in Soviet Ukraine, Soviet Kazakhstan, and Soviet Russia died horrible and humiliating deaths between 1930 and 1933. But before it was over, Soviet citizens were butchering corpses for human meat. In 1933, as the starvation in the USSR reached its height, the Nazi Party came to power in Germany. In the euphoria of victory, Nazis tried to organize a boycott of Jewish shops. This was not very successful at first, but the practice of marking one firm as Jewish and another as Aryan with paint on the windows or walls did affect the way Germans thought about household economics. A shop marked Jewish had no future. It became an object of covetous plans. As property was marked as ethnic, envy transformed ethics. If shops could be Jewish, what about other companies and properties? The wish that Jews might disappear, perhaps suppressed at first, rose as it was leavened by greed. Thus, the Germans who marked shops as Jewish participated in the process by which Jews really did disappear, and did people who simply looked on. Accepting the markings as a natural part of the urban landscape was already a compromise with a murderous future. You might one day be offered the opportunity to display symbols of loyalty. Make sure that such symbols include your fellow citizens rather than exclude them. Even the history of lapel pins is far from innocent. In Nazi Germany in 1933, people wore lapel pins that said yes during the elections and referendum that confirmed the one-party state. In Austria in 1938, people who had not previously been Nazis began to wear swastika pins. What might seem like a gesture of pride can be a source of exclusion. In the Europe of the 1930s and 40s, some people chose to wear swastikas, and then others had to wear yellow stars. In the late history of communism, when no one believed in the revolution anymore, offers a final lesson about symbols. Even when citizens are demoralized and wish only to be left alone, public markers can still sustain a tyrannical regime. When Czechoslovak communists won elections in 1946 and then proceeded to claim full power after a coup in 1948, many Czechoslovak citizens were euphoric. When the dissident thinker Václav Havel wrote The Power of the Powerless 3 decades later in 1978, he was explaining the continuity of an oppressive regime in whose goals and ideology few people still believed. He offered a parable of a greengrocer who places a sign reading, "Workers of the world unite," in his shop window. It is not that the man actually endorses the content of this quotation from the Communist Manifesto. He places the sign in his window so that he can withdraw into daily life without trouble from the authorities. When everyone else follows the same logic, the public sphere is covered with signs of loyalty, and resistance becomes unthinkable. As Havel put it, quote, "We have seen that the real meaning of the greengrocer slogan has nothing to do with what the text of the slogan actually says. Even so, the real meaning is quite clear and generally comprehensible because the code is so familiar. The greengrocer declares his loyalty in the only way the regime is capable of hearing. That is, by accepting the prescribed ritual, by accepting appearances as reality, by accepting the given rules of the game, thus making it possible for the game to go on, for it to exist in the first place." And what happens, asked Havel, if no one plays the game? What happens if no one plays the game? Okay. So look, I don't expect anyone here you're not wearing a red hat, but I guess it's good to understand the deeper. I mean, I feel like it's so blatant that we understand the slogan is not actually what the slogan means, but is instead just expressing a loyalty to the team behind the slogan. We know this. Number 5, remember professional ethics. When political leaders set a negative example, professional commitments to just practice become more important. It is hard to subvert a rule of law state without lawyers, or to hold show trials without judges. Authoritarians need obedient civil servants, and concentration camp directors seek businessmen interested in cheap labor. Before the Second World War, a man named Hans Frank, or Hans Frank, was Hitler's personal lawyer. After Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Frank became the Governor General of occupied Poland and a German colony where millions of Jews and other Polish citizens were murdered. He once boasted that there were not enough trees to make the paper for posters that would be needed to announce all of the executions. Frank claimed that the law was meant to serve the race, and so what seemed good for the race was therefore law. With the arguments like this, German lawyers could convince themselves that laws and rules were there to serve their projects of conquest and destruction rather than to hinder them. The man Hitler chose to oversee the annexation of Austria, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, was a lawyer who later ran the occupation of the Netherlands. Lawyers were vastly overrepresented among the commanders of the Einsatzgruppen, the special task force who carried out the mass murder of Jews, gypsies, Polish elites, communists, the handicapped, homosexuals, trans people, and others. German and other physicians took part in ghastly medical experiments in the concentration camps. Businessmen from IG Farben and other German firms exploited the labor of concentration camp inmates, Jews in ghettos, and prisoners of war. Civil servants, from ministers down to secretaries, oversaw and recorded it all. If lawyers had followed the norm of no execution without trial, if doctors had accepted the rule of no surgery without consent, if businessmen had endorsed the prohibition of slavery, if bureaucrats had refused to handle paperwork involving murder, then the Nazi regime would have been much harder pressed to carry out the atrocities by which we remember it. Professions can create forms of ethical conversation that are impossible between a lonely individual and a distant government. If members of professions think of themselves as groups with common interests, with norms and rules that oblige them all at all times, then they can gain confidence and indeed a certain kind of power. Professional ethics must guide us precisely when we are told that the situation is exceptional. Then there is no such thing as just following orders. If members of the professions confuse their specific ethics with the emotions of the moment, however, they can find themselves saying and doing things they might previously have thought unimaginable. Now, what does that remind me of? It makes me think of tech and facial recognition technology being sold to the police. Just another example. Let's see. It certainly doesn't seem as extreme as surgery without consent and businessmen keeping tabs on the dollars and cents cost of concentration camp expenses. But, if you've seen 13th, you know how much big business is in bed with mass incarceration. I'm gonna play a little music while I take a big coffee piss. Here, this is a piss song. Can we get a Chiron that says piss song? This is a piss song. I hope this piss isn't too long. I'm gonna take a piss. Come on back. You could take one too. To this track, it's called a piss song. That was a piss song. Okay. Did everyone else, as my dad would say, did everything come out all right? Let's see. If anybody else wants to get in on the conversation, if anyone disagrees with what I'm doing, if anyone wants to challenge me or Timothy Snyder, I don't know if I'll have a cogent response, or if you'd like to underline a specific thing that may have hit you a certain way, I'm open to hearing that. Thank you for being here. We got 45 people here. Honestly, that's a lot more than I thought would join us for this today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for donating to the Okra Project. Even if you've donated $1, look, food is essential. You know that. You need food. Everyone needs food. Have you ever had a meal cooked for you? It's so, it takes a lot of pressure off. And there is a lot of pressure being applied to Black trans people right now. From the government, from intolerant society. If we can provide just a small amount of relief, peace of mind, nourishment, health, then we've done something. Hopefully we are growing by doing something, sending our money and our positive energy to people who need it. But we still have to know tyranny in order to fight against it. That's why we keep reading. Okay, number 6 is a big one. Be wary of paramilitaries. Be wary of paramilitaries. Be wary of paramilitaries. Be wary of paramilitaries. When the men with guns who have always claimed to be against the system start wearing uniforms and marching with torches and pictures of a leader, the end is nigh. When the pro-leader, paramilitary, and the official police and the military intermingle, the end has come. Okay? We're not there quite yet. Okay. Most governments, most of the time, seek to monopolize violence. If only the government can legitimately use force, and this use is constrained by law, then the forms of politics that we take for granted become possible. It is impossible to carry out democratic elections, try cases at court, design and enforce laws, or indeed manage any of the other quiet business of government when agencies beyond the state also have access to violence. For just this reason, people and parties who wish to undermine democracy and the rule of law create and fund violent organizations that involve themselves in politics. Such groups can take the form of a paramilitary wing of a political party, the personal bodyguard of a particular politician, or apparently spontaneous citizens' initiatives, which usually turn out to have been organized by a party or its leader. Armed groups first degrade a political order and then transform it. Violent right-wing groups such as the Iron Guard in interwar Romania, or the Arrow Cross in interwar Hungary, intimidated their rivals. Nazi stormtroopers began as security detail, clearing the halls of Hitler's opponents during his rallies. As paramilitaries known as the SA and the SS, they created a climate of fear that helped the Nazi Party in the paramilitary elections of 1932 and 1933. Sorry. I'm going to reread that because I got a word wrong. As the paramilitaries known as the SA and the SS, they created a climate of fear that helped the Nazi Party in the parliamentary elections of 1932 and 1933. In Austria in 1938, it was the local SA that quickly took advantage of the absence of the usual local authority to loot, beat, and humiliate Jews, thereby creating the rules of politics and preparing the way for the Nazi takeover of the country. It was the SS that ran the German concentration camps, lawless zones where ordinary rules did not apply. During the Second World War, the SS extended the lawlessness it had pioneered in the camps to whole European countries under German occupation. The SS began as an organization outside the law, became an organization that transcended the law, and then ended up as an organization that undid the law. Because the American federal government uses mercenaries in warfare and American state governments pay corporations to run prisons, the use of violence in the United States is already highly privatized, very big business. What is novel is a president who wishes to maintain, while in office, a personal security force which during his campaign used force against dissenters. As a candidate, the president ordered a private security detail to clear opponents from rallies, but also encouraged the audience itself to remove people who expressed different opinions. A protester would be first greeted with boos and then frenetic cries of USA, and then be forced to leave the rally. At one campaign rally, the candidate said, "There's a remnant left over. Maybe get the remnant out. Get the remnant out." The crowd, taking its cue, then tried to root out other people who might be dissenters, all the while crying USA. The candidate interjected, "Isn't this more fun than a regular boring rally? To me, it's fun." This kind of mob violence was meant to transform the political atmosphere, and it did. For violence to transform not just the atmosphere, but also the system, the emotions of rallies and the ideology of exclusion have to be incorporated into the training of armed guards. These first challenge the police and military, then penetrate the police and military, and finally transform the police and military. Yeah, that's well, we can't speak on the military too much currently, but we're seeing that happen with the police. I think as early as 2006, there were studies of the KKK infiltrating the police departments. And they didn't really do anything about that. I don't know. Let's see. Just checking comments for a sec. If you want to talk, I'm here. I'm just reading. Okay, number 7. I really don't know if this applies to any of us, but be reflective if you must be armed. If you carry a weapon in public service, may God bless you and keep you. But know that the evils of the past involved policemen and soldiers finding themselves one day doing irregular things. Be ready to say no. Authoritarian regimes usually include a special riot police force whose task is to disperse citizens who seek to protest, and secret police force whose assignments include the murder of dissenters or other designated as enemies. And indeed, we find forces of the latter kind deeply involved in the great atrocities of the 20th century, such as the Great Terror in the Soviet Union of 1937 and 38, and the Holocaust of European Jews perpetrated by Nazi Germany in 1941 through 45. Yet we make a great mistake if we imagine that the Soviet NKVD or the Nazi SS acted without support. Without the assistance of regular police forces and sometimes regular soldiers, they could not have killed on such a large scale. In the Great Terror in the Soviet Union, NKVD officers recorded 682,691 executions of supposed enemies of the state. most of them peasants or members of national minorities. Perhaps no organ of violence has ever been more centralized or better organized than the NKVD of those years. A small number of men carried out the neck shots, which meant that the certain NKVD officers had thousands of political murders on their consciences. Even so, they could not possibly have carried out this campaign without the assistance of local police forces, legal professionals, and civil servants throughout the Soviet Union. The Great Terror took place during a state of exception that required all policemen to subordinate themselves to the NKVD and its special tasks. The policemen were not the principal perpetrators, but they provided the indispensable manpower. When we think of the Nazi Holocaust of the Jews, we imagine Auschwitz and the mechanized impersonal death. This was a convenient way for Germans to remember the Holocaust, since they could claim that a few of them had known exactly what had happened behind those gates. In fact, the Holocaust began not in the death facilities, but over shooting pits in Eastern Europe. And indeed, some of the commanders of the Einsatzgruppen, the German task forces that penetrated some of the murders, were tried at Nuremberg and later in West German courts. But even these trials were a kind of minimization of the scale of the crime. Not the SS commanders alone, but essentially all of thousands of men who served under their command were murderers. And this was just the beginning. Every large-scale shooting action of the Holocaust, more than 33,000 Jews murdered outside of Kiev, more than 28,000 outside Riga, and on, involved the regular German police. All in all, regular policemen murdered more Jews than the Einsatzgruppen. Many of them had no special preparation for this task. They found themselves in an unknown land. They had their orders, and they did not want to look weak. In the rare cases that they refused these orders to murder Jews, policemen were not punished. Some killed from murderous conviction, but many others who killed were just afraid to stand out. Other forces were at work besides conformism. But without the conformists, the great atrocities would have been impossible. I've read, I don't know if this is true, that 6 New York police officers are resigning every day. But I know that there are a lot that are just afraid to not conform. The blue wall of brotherhood is seemingly impenetrable, but it is. And hopefully more and more of them are waking up to the conformism that is poisoning the ethics of their practice. Thank you for joining me today. Number 8, stand out. Stand out. Someone has to. It is easy to follow along. It can feel strange to do or say something different. But without that unease, there is no freedom. Remember Rosa Parks. That moment you set an example. The spell of the status quo is broken, and others will follow. After the Second World War, Europeans, Americans, and others created myths of righteous resistance to Hitler. In the 30s, however, the dominant attitude had been accommodation and admiration. By 1940, most Europeans had made their peace with the seemingly irresistible power of Nazi Germany. Influential Americans such as Charles Lindbergh opposed war with the Nazis under the slogan, "America First." It is those who were considered exceptional, eccentric, or even insane in their own time, those who did not change when the world around them did, whom we remember and admire today. Well before the Second World War, numerous European states had abandoned democracy for some form of right-wing authoritarianism. Italy became the first fascist state in 1922 and was a military ally of Germany. Hungary Romania, and Bulgaria had been drawn towards Germany by the promise of trade and territory. In March 1938, none of the great powers offered any resistance as Germany annexed Austria. In September 1938, the great powers, France, Italy, and Great Britain, then led by Neville Chamberlain, actually cooperated with Nazi Germany in the partition of Czechoslovakia. In summer 1939, the Soviet Union allied with Nazi Germany, and the Red Army joined the Wehrmacht in the invasion of Poland. The Polish government chose to fight, activating agreements that brought Great Britain and France into the war. Germany, supplied with food and fuel by the Soviet Union, invaded and quickly occupied Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and even France in the spring of 1940. The remainder of the British expeditionary force was evacuated from the continent at Dunkirk in late May and early June 1940. When Winston Churchill became Prime Minister in May 1940, Great Britain was alone. The British had won no meaningful battles and had no important allies. They had entered the war to support Poland, a cause that seemed lost. Nazi Germany and its Soviet ally dominated the continent. The Soviet Union had invaded Finland in November 1939, beginning with a bombing of Helsinki. Right after Churchill assumed office, the Soviet Union occupied and annexed the 3 Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The United States had not entered the war. Pardon me. Adolf Hitler had no special animus towards Britain or its empire, and indeed imagined a division of the world into spheres of interest. He expected Churchill to come to terms after the fall of France. Churchill did not. He told the French that whatever you may do, we shall fight on forever and ever and ever. In June 1940, Churchill told the British Parliament that the Battle of Britain is about to begin. The German Luftwaffe began the bombing of the British cities. Hitler expected that this would force Churchill to sign an armistice, but he was mistaken. Churchill later called the air campaign a time when it was equally good to live or die. He spoke of the buoyant and imperturbable temper of Britain, which I had the honor to express. In fact, he himself helped the British to define themselves as a proud people who would calmly resist evil. The other politicians would have found support in British public opinion to end the war. Churchill instead resisted, inspired, and won. The Royal Air Force, including 2 Polish squadrons and a number of other foreign pilots, held back the Luftwaffe. Without control of the air, even Hitler could not imagine an amphibious invasion of Great Britain. Churchill did what others had not done. Rather than concede in advance, he forced Hitler to change his plans. The essential German strategy had been to remove any resistance in the West and then to invade, thus betraying the Soviet Union and colonize its Western territories. In June 1941, with Britain still in the war, Germany attacked its Soviet ally. Now Berlin had to fight a 2-front war, and Moscow and London were suddenly unexpected allies. In December 1941, Japan bombed the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and the United States entered the war. Now Moscow, Washington, and London formed a grand and irresistible coalition. Together, and with the help of many other allies, these 3 great powers won the Second World War. But had Churchill not kept Britain in the war in 1940, there would have been no such war to fight. Churchill said that history would be kind to him because he intended to write it himself. Yet his vast histories and memoirs, he presented his own decisions as self-evident and credited the British people and Britain's allies. Today, what Churchill did seems normal and right, but at the time he had to stand out. Of course, Great Britain was only in the war because the Polish leadership had chosen to fight in September 1939. Polish armed resistance was overcome that October. In 1940, the character of the German occupation was becoming clear in the Polish capital, Warsaw. Teresa Prekharova was meant to finish high school that year. Her family lost its property to the Germans and was forced to move to Warsaw and rent. Her father was arrested. One of her uncles was killed in battle. 2 of her brothers were in German prisoner of war camps. Warsaw itself had been heavily damaged by a German air campaign, which had killed about 25,000 people. Teresa, a very young woman, stood out among her friends and family in her reaction to this horror. At a time when it was natural to think only of oneself, she thought of others. In late 1940, the Germans began to establish ghettos in the part of Poland under their control. That October, the Jews of Warsaw and the surrounding region were required to move to a certain district of the city. One of Teresa's brothers had been friendly with a Jewish girl and her family before the war. Teresa was now observed that people quietly allowed their Jewish friends to slip away from their lives. Without telling her family and at great risk to herself, Teresa chose to enter the Warsaw Ghetto a dozen times in late 1940, bringing food and medicine to Jews she knew and Jews she did not. By the end of the year, she had persuaded her brother's friends to escape the ghetto. In 1942, Teresa helped the girl's parents and brother to escape. That summer in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Germans carried out what they called the Great Action, deporting some 265,040 Jews to the death factory of Treblinka to be murdered and killing another 10,380 Jews in the ghetto itself. Teresa saved a family from certain death. Teresa Prikova later became a historian of the Holocaust, writing about the Warsaw Ghetto and about others who helped to aid Jews. But she preferred not to write about herself. When, much later, she was asked to speak out about her own life, she called her actions normal. From our perspective, her actions seemed exceptional. She stood out. Okay. So this particular story seems poignant because, and without trying to bend backwards too hard to seem self-congratulatory, we are, or this event, the intention of this event, this reading, is to raise money for persecuted people, to give them food. Much like how undercover Teresa snuck into the ghettos to give food to the Jews and rescue a family. So it's digital, it's in the comfort of our own homes, and it's tweeting and it's live streaming, and it's not the most visible, it's not the most immediate, but this is, in a small way, I think, a practice of standing out, right? And to remember that feeding people who need help is the regular and right thing to do. It's unfortunate that something like this seems like the exceptional, unusual thing to do. That's all. That's all I'll say there. Does anyone want to chime in? Does anyone want to join in on the conversation? If you have the Discord app, you go to the Planet Scum Discord, you can come talk to me. Cool. Thank you for being here. Number 9. Be kind to our language. What does that mean? Be kind to our language. Avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. Avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. Think up your own way of speaking, even if only to convey that thing you think everyone is saying. Make an effort to separate yourself from the internet. Read books. Okay, halfway there. Avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. Okay. Think up your own way of speaking, even if only to convey that thing you think everyone is saying. Make an effort to separate yourself from the internet. Read books. Victor Klemperer, a literary scholar of Jewish origin, turned his philosophical training against Nazi propaganda. He noticed how Hitler's language rejected legitimate opposition. The people always meant some people and not others. The president uses words this way. Encounters were always struggles. The president says winning. And any attempt by free people to understand the world in a different way was defamation of the leader. Or, as the president puts it, libel or fake news. Politicians in our times feed their cliches to television, where even those who wish to disagree repeat them. Television purports to challenge political language by conveying images, but the succession from one frame to another can hinder a sense of resolution. Everything happens fast, but nothing actually happens. Each story on televised news is breaking until it is displaced by the next one. So we are hit by wave upon wave, but never seeing the ocean. The effort to define the shape and significance of events requires words and concepts that elude us when we are entranced by visual stimuli. Watching televised news is sometimes little more than looking at someone who is looking at a picture. We take this collective trance to be normal, and we have slowly fallen into it. More than half a century ago, the classic novels of totalitarianism warned of the domination of screens, the suppression of books, the narrowing of vocabularies, and the associated difficulties of thought. In Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 51, published in 1953, firemen find and burn books while most citizens watch interactive television. Ooh. In George Orwell's 1984, published in 1941, books are banned and television is two-way, allowing the government to observe citizens at all times. Ooh! In 1984, the language of visual media is highly constrained to starve the public of the concepts needed to think about the present, remember the past, and consider the future. One of the regime's projects is to limit the language further by eliminating ever more words with each edition of the official dictionary. Staring at screens is perhaps unavoidable, but the two-dimensional world makes little sense unless we can draw upon a mental armory that we have developed somewhere else. When we repeat the same words and phrases that appear in the daily media, we accept the absence of a larger framework. To have such a framework requires more concepts, and having more concepts requires reading. So get screens out of your room and surround yourself with books. The characters in Orwell's and Bradbury's books could not do this, but we still can. What to read? Any good novel enlivens our ability to think about ambiguous situations and judge the intentions of others. Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov and Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being might suit our moment. Sinclair Lewis's novel, It Can't Happen Here, perhaps not a great work of art. Philip Roth's The Plot Against America is better. Okay, shade on books. Why not just bring up the good book? And I don't know. Sorry, Timothy Snyder, if you're watching. One novel known by millions of young Americans that offers an account of tyranny and resistance is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Everybody donate $1 to the Okra Project right now. Sorry, I did not anticipate mentioning that author. If you or your friends or children did not read it that way the first time, then it bears reading again. Cancel. Cancel. There's other books out there, guys. Sorry to everyone who loves Harry Potter, including someone who I love very much, who lives with me and married me. Okay. Some of the political and historical texts that inform the arguments made here are Politics in the English Language by George Orwell, The Language of the Third Reich by Victor Klemperer, The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt, The Rebel by Albert Camus, The Captive Mind by Czesław Miłosz, The Power of the Powerless by Václav Havel, How to Be a Conservative Liberal Socialist by Leszek Kolakowski, The Uses of Adversity by Timothy Garton Ash, The Burden of Responsibility by Tony Judt, Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning, and Nothing is True and Everything is Possible by Peter Pomerantsev. Christians might return to the foundational book, which as ever is very timely. Jesus preached that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. The smugness I feel of having snubbed J.K. Rowling as a terrible writer at 9 years old is unrivaled right now. Hey, hats off to you. 9 years old. Wow, you really had your shit together. Cool. All right. We should be modest, for whoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. And of course, we must be concerned with what is true and what is false. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. That's the end of the 9th chapter. I love language. If you guys know a little bit about me, you know I love music. I love lyrics. I love poetry in music. I love to play with words. It's important. Turning words into a game and an activity helps you gain a greater appreciation for words. Reading, of course, does that as well. And maybe, so I listed off a bunch of these books that Timothy Snyder mentioned about just the politics. Well, one of the books by George Orwell is called The Politics and the English Language. And it's very captivating to realize how just subtle tricks of language are used for and against us to make us believe certain things are possible and certain things aren't. An example that comes to mind is the difference between the word defund and reform when talking about police. Reform versus defund versus abolish. Radical. Eradicate. I think about, radical and eradicate a lot. Radish, it's a root vegetable, right? So to eradicate something means to uproot, to take it out by the root. Doesn't just mean to destroy. Smallpox wasn't just eradicated. You had to go to the source of it and uproot it from, the human body. Radical, to get to the root of the issue. Speaking of radical, take a look at this red donut. Oh, okay. Drop the donut. It's okay. It's snack. Oh, this is so good. Guys, if you have any money left over after donating to Okra Project, I recommend going to Southern Roots Vegan Bakery. It's I found out about this bakery last week. It's a Black-owned business. It was on one of those lists of Black-owned businesses, and it's a vegan bakery. And they make donuts. They sent me. They didn't just send me. Like, I bought it. I'm a customer. I'm not just some special person. I bought a dozen donuts. They came in the mail. They're fresh. They're delicious, and they're vegan. And you're helping a Black-owned business, which feels good. I'll be honest. I'm not the most conscious consumer. It's something I really have to work on. But it's good to pay attention to where your money's going. Okay. Y'all ready for 10? Oh, good. We're getting a good discussion about the authors that were mentioned. I like that. Okay, very good. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. That's a good red velvet donut. 10. Believe in truth. Guys, to abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing's true, then no one can criticize power because there's no basis upon which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. The biggest wallet pays for the most blinding lights. You submit to tyranny when you renounce the difference between what you want to hear and what is actually the case. This renunciation of reality can feel natural and pleasant, but the result is your demise as an individual, and thus the collapse of any political system that depends upon individualism. As observers of totalitarianism, such as Victor Klemperer noticed, truth dies in 4 modes, all of which we have just witnessed. Okay. The first mode is the open hostility to verifiable reality, which takes the form of presenting inventions and lies as if they were facts. The president does this at a high rate and a fast pace. One attempt during the 2016 campaign to track his utterances found that 78% of his factual claims were false. This proportion is so high that it makes the correct assertions seem like unintended oversights on the path towards total fiction. Demeaning the world as it is begins the creation of a fictional counterworld. The second mode is a shamanistic incantation. As Klemperer noted, the fascist style depends upon endless repetition, designed to make the fictional plausible and the criminal desirable. The systematic use of nicknames such as Lion Ted and Crooked Hillary displaced certain character traits that might more appropriately have been affixed to the president himself. Something that makes me think of is believe me, believe me. Yet through blunt repetition over Twitter, our president managed to the transformation of individuals into stereotypes that people then spoke aloud. At rallies, the repeated chants of build that wall and lock her up did not describe anything that the president had specific plans to do, but their very grandiosity established a connection between him and his audience. The next mode is magical thinking, or the embrace of contradiction. The president's campaign involved the promises of cutting taxes for everyone, eliminating the national debt, and then increasing spending on both social policy and national defense. These promises mutually contradict. It is as if A farmer said he were taking an egg from the hen house, boiling it whole, and serving it to his wife, and also poaching it and serving it to his children, and then returning it to the hen unbroken, and then watching as the chick hatched. Contradictory. Accepting untruth of this radical kind requires a blatant abandonment of reason. Klemperer's descriptions of losing friends in Germany in 1933 over the issue of magical thinking ring eerily true today. One of his former students implored him to abandon yourself to your feelings, and you must always focus on the Führer's greatness rather than on the discomfort you are feeling at present. Whoa! 12 years later, after all the atrocities, and at the end of a war that Germany had clearly lost, an amputated soldier told Klemperer that Hitler has never lied yet. I believe in Hitler. That's a quote. You know me. The final mode is misplaced faith. It involves the sort of self-deifying claims the president made when he said that I alone can solve it, or I am your voice. Remember that? When faith descends from heaven to earth in this way, no room remains for the small truths of our individual discernment and experience. What terrified Klemperer was the way that this tradition seemed permanent. Once truth had become oracular rather than factual, evidence was irrelevant. At the end of the war, a worker told Klemperer that understanding is useless. You have to have faith. I believe in Führer. Eugene Ionesco, the great Romanian playwright, watched one friend after another slip away from the language of fascism. He watched one after another slip away into the language of fascism in the 30s. The experience became the basis for his 1959 absurdist play, Rhinoceros, in which those who fall prey to propaganda are transformed into giant horned beasts. Of his own personal experience, Ionesco wrote, university professors, students, intellectuals were turning Nazi, becoming iron guards, one after another. At the beginning, certainly they were not Nazis. About 15 of us would get together and try to find arguments opposing theirs. It was not easy. From time to time, one of our friends said, I don't agree with them, to be sure, but on certain points, nevertheless, I must admit, for example, the Jews, ... etc. And this was a symptom. 3 weeks later, this person would become a Nazi. He was caught in the mechanism. He accepted everything. He became a rhinoceros. Towards the end, only 3 or 4 of us were still resisting. Ionesco's claim was to help us see just how bizarre propaganda actually is, but how normal it seems to those who yield to it. By using the absurd image of the rhinoceros, Ionesco was trying to shock people into noticing the strangeness of what was actually happening. The rhinoceri are roaming through our neurological savannas. We now find ourselves very much concerned with something we call post-truth, and we tend to think that its scorn of everyday facts and its construction of alternate realities is something new or postmodern. Yet there is little here that George Orwell did not capture 7 decades ago in his notion of doublethink. In its philosophy, post-truth restores precisely the fascist attitude to truth, and that is why nothing in our own world would startle Klemperer or Ionesco. Fascists despise the small truths of daily existence, loved slogans that resonated like a new religion, and preferred creative myths to history or journalism. They used new media, which at the time was radio, to create a drumbeat of propaganda that aroused feelings before people had time to ascertain facts. And now, as then, many people confused faith in a hugely flawed leader with the truth that about the world we all share. Post-truth is pre-fascism. Okay. So the truth is out there, right? The more I'm reading this book all in one go, it's like I'm seeing a very complicated web forming. Because while truth is out there, it's hard to pull it out from the feeling, right? Even now, I'm reading with feeling to get what I perceive to be the truth out there with some kind of urgency and flavor. I'm trying to keep you involved. I'm trying to keep you engaged. But, then, we bring in the idea that, like, we're communicating through screens. We're still watching news. We know that the news cycle is kind of broken down into this thing where everything is breaking news. We know who owns the television news companies that will use language to distort and soften the truth in subtle and clever ways. You gotta be vigilant, I guess. And personally, I see an aspect of that vigilance being picking up a book more often than relying on the feed coming off of my screen. And it is a little hypocritical and it is a little paradoxical that I am using new media to deliver message from a book, but I guess there could be an argument made that if you're patient enough to stick around and listen to me read from a book rather than go to a YouTube page where I may process and then kind of deliver my own take on the book, which could be accurate or inaccurate based on my agenda. You know what I mean? It takes a lot of patience and persistence and patience. Did I say patience twice? I'm hopped up on this big ass coffee. I don't know. It takes time and effort to read a book. Thank you to the 35 of you watching. I know that the numbers may be dwindling, but I think I'm just going to read this whole book. We're halfway through. We're on number 11 now. We got, yeah, you can do math. We're there. We're halfway there. Okay, so the news is good for information, but the books help you expand your understanding of the news. Thank you, broke physics. Investigate. This is touching right upon all the concerns that I was just spewing. Okay. Figure out things for yourself. Spend more time with long articles. Subsidize investigative journalism by subscribing to print media. Realize that some of what is on the internet is there to harm you. Learn about sites that investigate propaganda campaigns, some of which come from abroad. Take responsibility for what you communicate with others. What is truth? Sometimes people ask this question because they wish to do nothing. Generic cynicism makes us feel hip and alternative, even as we slip with our fellow citizens into a morass of indifference. It is your ability to discern facts that makes you an individual, and our collective trust in common knowledge that makes us a society. The individual who investigates is also the citizen who builds. The leader who dislikes the investigators is a potential tyrant. That reminds me really quick just of one of the best simple definitions of journalism I've ever heard is God. It's something like exposing the work that people don't want you to know. So, once again, the leader who dislikes the investigators is a potential tyrant. I love that. During his campaign, the president claimed on a Russian propaganda outlet that American media has been unbelievably dishonest. He banned many reporters from his rallies and regularly elicited hatred of journalists from the public. Like the leaders of authoritarian regimes, he promised to suppress freedom of speech by laws that would prevent criticism. Like Hitler, the president used the word lies to mean statements of fact, not to his liking, and presented journalism as a campaign against himself. The president was on friendlier terms with the internet, his source for erroneous information that he passed on to millions of people. In 1971, contemplating the lies told in the United States about the Vietnam War, the political theorist Hannah Arendt took comfort in the inherent powers of facts to overcome falsehoods in a free society. Under normal circumstances, the liar is defeated by reality, for which there is no substitute. No matter how large the tissue of falsehoods that an experienced liar has to offer, it will never be large enough, even if he enlists the help of computers to cover the immensity of factuality. The part about computers is no longer true. In the 2016 presidential election, the two-dimensional world of the internet was more important than the three-dimensional world of human contact. People going door to door to canvass encountered the surprised blinking of American citizens who realized that they would have to talk about politics with a flesh and blood human rather than having their views affirmed by their Facebook feeds. Within the two-dimensional internet world, new collectivities have arisen, invisible by the light of day, tribes with distinct worldviews beholden to manipulations. And yes, there is a conspiracy that you can find online. It is the one to keep you online looking for conspiracies. We need print journalists so that stories can develop on the page and in our minds. What does it mean, for example, that the president says that women belong at home, that pregnancy is an inconvenience, that mothers do not give 100% at work, that women should be punished for having abortions, that women are slobs, pigs, or dogs, and that it is permissible to sexually assault them? What does it mean that 6 of the president's companies have gone bankrupt, that the president's enterprises have been financed by mysterious infusions of cash from entities in Russia and Kazakhstan? We can learn these things on various media. When we learn them from a screen, however, we tend to be drawn in by the logic of spectacle. When we learn of one scandal, it whets our appetite for the next. When we subliminally accept that we are watching a reality show rather than thinking about real life, no image can actually hurt the president politically. Reality television has become more dramatic with each episode. If we found a video of the president performing Cossack dances while Vladimir Putin claps, we would probably just demand the same thing with the president wearing a bear suit and holding rubles in his mouth. The better print journalists allow us to consider the meaning for ourselves and our country of what might otherwise seem to be isolated bits of information. But while anyone can repost an article, researching and writing is hard work that requires time and money. Before you deride the mainstream media, note that it is no longer the mainstream. It is derision that is the mainstream and easy, and actual journalism that is edgy and difficult. So try for yourself to write a proper article involving work in the real world, traveling, interviewing, maintaining relationships with sources, researching and written records, verifying everything, writing and revising drafts, all on a tight and unforgiving schedule. If you find you like doing this, keep a blog. In the meantime, give credit to those who do all of that for a living. Journalists are not perfect any more than people in other vocations are perfect. But the work of people who adhere to journalistic ethics is of a different quality than the work of those who do not. We find it natural that we pay for a plumber or a mechanic, but demand our news for free. If we did not pay for plumbing or auto repair, we would not expect to drink water or drive cars. Why then should we form our political judgment on the basis of zero investment? We get what we pay for. If we do pursue the facts, the internet gives us enviable power to convey them. The authorities cited here had nothing of the kind. Leszek Kolakowski, a great Polish philosopher and historian for whom this book takes its epigraph, lost his chair at Warsaw University for speaking out against communist regime and could not publish. The first quotation in his book from Hannah Arendt came from a pamphlet entitled We Refugees, a miraculous achievement written by someone who had escaped a murderous Nazi regime. A brilliant mind like Victor Klemperer, who much admired today, is remembered only because he stubbornly kept a hidden diary under a Nazi rule. For him, it was sustenance. My diary was my balancing pole, without which I would have fallen down 1,000 times. Václav Havel, the most important thinker among communist dissidents of the 1970s, dedicated his most important essay, The Power of the Powerless, to a philosopher who died shortly after interrogation by the Czechoslovak Communist Secret Police in communist Czechoslovakia. His pamphlet had to be circulated illegally in a few copies as what East Europeans at the time, following the Russian dissidents, called samizdat. If the main pillar of the system is living a lie, wrote Havel, then it is not surprising that the fundamental threat to it is living in truth. Since the age of the internet, we are all publishers. Each of us bears some private responsibility for the public sense of truth. If we are serious about seeking the facts, then we can make a small revolution in the way the internet works. If you are verifying information for yourself, you will not send on fake news to others. If you choose to follow reporters whom you have reason to trust, you can also transmit what they have learned to others. If you retweet only the work of humans who have followed journalistic protocols, you are less likely to debase your brain interacting with bots and trolls. We do not see the minds that we hurt when we publish falsehoods, but that does not mean we do no harm. Think of driving a car. We do not see the other driver, but we know not to run into his car. We know that the damage will be mutual. We protect the other person without seeing him dozens of times every day. Likewise, although we may not see the other person in front of his or her computer, we have our share of responsibility for what he or she is reading there. If we can avoid doing violence to the minds of unseen others and on the internet, others will learn to do the same. And then perhaps our internet traffic will cease to look like one great bloody accident. I don't know. It feels hypocritical to be on Twitter all day and just kind of retweet things. But lately, as traumatizing as it is, I try to spread footage of police brutality because it's clear as day that that's happening, and that it's happening unprovoked during peaceful protests. Know what I mean? I'm just trying to hold myself accountable here. Please donate to the Okra project if you can. I'll be honest. My throat hurts. I got walnuts. I got water. I Got a vegan red velvet donut from Southern Roots Bakery. I'm so glad to have you here. I'm so glad to be doing this. What's the symbolic takeaway we can surmise from my voice being strained right now? Well, using your voice takes energy. All right, we really don't need to get into that. You understand where I'm going. Okay, I was looking forward to this one because this is challenging. Number 12. Make eye contact and small talk. It's tough. Not just because we're introverts and we're nerds and we're garbage people or whatever, but because we're in lockdown. Okay. Number 12. Stay safe, everyone. Wear a mask. Don't go to St. Mark's Place in Manhattan. Fucking idiots. All right. Number 12. Make eye contact and small talk. This is not just polite. It's part of being a citizen and a responsible member of society. It is also a way to stay in touch with your surroundings, break down social barriers, and understand whom you should and should not trust. If we enter a culture of denunciation, you will want to know the psychological landscape of your daily life. Tyrannical regimes arose at different times and places in the Europe of the 20th century, but memoirs of their victims all share a single tender moment. Whether the recollection is of fascist Italy in the 20s, Nazi Germany in the 30s, of the Soviet Union during the Great Terror of 1937 and 38, or of purges in communist Eastern Europe of the 40s and 50s, people who were living in fear of repression remembered how their neighbors treated them. A smile, a handshake, a word of greeting, banal gestures in normal situations took on great significance. When friends, colleagues, and acquaintances looked away or crossed the street to avoid contact, fear grew. You might not be sure today or tomorrow who feels threatened in the United States, but if you affirm everyone, you can be sure that certain people will feel better. In the most dangerous of times, those who escape and survive generally know people whom they can trust. Having old friends is the politics of last resort, and making new ones is the first step toward change. Making new friends is the first step towards change. Okay. This is especially challenging during quarantine. I know that I have been walking outside wearing a mask, seeing someone else wear a mask, and you turn to avoid. How do you make small talk with people when, to a certain degree, talking at people is impolite and maybe dangerous, And man, it makes it a lot harder. We're not done though. And look, although it's through a screen and although I'm just reading at you, I'm seeing a conversation forming in the chat that is heartening. And hopefully, maybe this isn't the last time we do this. I picked this book because it's small and it's concise and it's timely and it's, just got some pretty practical steps per chapter. But I don't know. I like seeing the discussion and I like knowing that I can do this and that maybe it can bring people together. This is the Vacation Jason Book Club. Is it? I don't know. I've never ran a book club before. I've never even been in a book club before. So I got some work to do there. Okay. Number 13, practice corporeal politics. Power wants your body softening in your chair and your emotions dissipating on the screen. Get outside. Put your body in unfamiliar places with unfamiliar people. Make new friends and march with them. Okay. I'm not going to tell you to do anything unsafe. I'm not going to ask you to, have bad judgment. I think we all know what good judgment is when we hear these things. But it is important to make new friends and march with them. For resistance to succeed, two boundaries must be crossed. First, ideas about change must engage people of various backgrounds who do not agree about everything. Second, people must find themselves in places that are not their homes and among groups who were not previously their friends. Protests can be organized through social media, but nothing is real that does not end on the streets. If tyrants feel no consequences for their actions in the three-dimensional world, nothing will change. One example of successful resistance to communism was in the Solidarity labor movement of Poland in 1980 and 81. A coalition of workers and professionals, elements of the Roman Catholic Church, and secular groups. Its leaders had learned hard lessons under communism. In 1968, the regime mobilized. I'm going to pause just to read this comment. Please do this again. I have to go, but thank you so much. I really appreciated that part of the needing to invest in your news sources if you actually value your political judgments. Thank you for being here, Embrick. I appreciate you. I appreciate you saying that. And I would like to do this again. Maybe one of the books that we choose will be from that list from earlier. But I'll keep everyone posted. I got to keep myself posted. Anyway, back to the reading. The one example of successful resistance to communism was the Solidarity labor movement of Poland in 1980 through 81, a coalition of workers and professionals, elements of the Roman Catholic Church, and secular groups. Its leaders had learned hard lessons under communism. In 1968, the regime mobilized workers against students who protested. In 1970, when a strike in Gdansk on the Baltic coast was bloodily suppressed, it was the workers' turn to feel isolated. In 76, however, intellectuals and professionals formed a group to assist workers who had been abused by the government. These were people from both the right and left, believers and atheists, who created trust among workers, people whom they would not otherwise have met. When Polish workers on the Baltic coast went on strike again in 1980, they were joined by lawyers, scholars, and others who helped make their case. The result was the creation of a free labor union, as well as government guarantees to observe human rights. During the 16 months that Solidarity was legal, 10 million people joined, and countless new friendships were created amid strikes, marches, and demonstrations. Oh, do we have someone wanting to join, or was that Jess? Was that Hex? What's going on? Okay, accident. That's fine. The Polish communist regime put down the movement with martial law in 1981. Yet 8 years later, in 1989, when they needed negotiating partners, the communists had to turn to Solidarity. The labor union insisted on elections, which it then won. It was the beginning of the end of communism in Poland, Eastern Europe, and the Soviet Union. The choice to be in public depends on the ability to maintain a private sphere of life. We are only free when it is we ourselves who draw the line between when we are seen and when we are not seen. It is so frustrating to read this and know this to be true, and to know that the act of protest is a risk to not only my own health, but to other people's health. I sadly have not joined any of the magnificent protests in New York, and I feel so guilty about that. I've tweeted, I've sent money to the bail funds. I'm raising money for persecuted people right now, but it's not the same. And I feel emboldened and inspired and enlightened by seeing these massive protests. But I know it's not the same as being immediately corporeally involved in them. It fucking sucks. I want to be there. And I'm not. It's frustrating. I appreciate all of you who have been involved in the protests. Some coffee went down the wrong pipe. Okay, number 14. Establish a private life. Nastier rulers will use what they know about you to push you around. Scrub your computer of malware on a regular basis. Remember that email is skywriting. Consider using alternative forms of the internet or simply using it less. Have personal exchanges in person. For the same reason, resolve any legal trouble. Tyrants seek the hook on which to hang you. So try not to have hooks. Okay. What the great political thinker Hannah Arendt meant by totalitarianism was not an all-powerful state, but the erasure of the difference between private and public life. We are free only insofar as we exercise control over what people know about us and in what circumstances they come to know it. During the campaign of 2016, we took a step towards totalitarianism without even noticing by accepting as normal the violation of electronic privacy. Whether it is done by American or Russian intelligence agencies, or for that matter, any institution, the theft, by discussion, or publication of personal communications destroys a basic foundation of our rights. If we have no control over who reads what and when, we have no ability to act in the present or plan for the future. Whoever can pierce your privacy can humiliate you and disrupt your relationships at will. No one, except perhaps a tyrant, has a private life that can survive public exposure by hostile directive. The timed email bombs of the 2016 presidential campaign were also a powerful form of disinformation. Words written in one situation make sense only in that context. The very act of removing them from their historical moment and dropping them in another is an act of falsification. What is worse, when media, followed by email bombs, as if they were news, betrayed their own mission. Few journalists made an effort to explain why people said or wrote the things they did at the time. Meanwhile, in transmitting the privacy violations as news, the media allowed themselves to be distracted from the actual events of the day. Rather than reporting the violation of basic rights, our media generally preferred to mindlessly indulge the inherently salacious interests that we have in other people's affairs. Our appetite for the secret, thought Arendt, is dangerously political. Totalitarianism removes the difference between private and public, not just to make individuals unfree, but also to draw the whole society away from normal politics and towards conspiracy theories. Rather than defining facts or generating interpretations, we are seduced by the notion of hidden realities and dark conspiracies that explain everything. As we learn from these email bombs, this mechanism works even when what is revealed is of no interest. The revelation of what was once confidential becomes the story itself. It is striking that news media are much worse at this than, say, fashion or sports reporters. Fashion reporters know that models are taking off their clothes in the changing rooms, and sport reporters know that athletes shower in the locker rooms, but neither allow private matters to supplant the public story they are supposed to be covering. When we take an active interest in matters of doubtful relevance at moments that are chosen by tyrants and spooks, we participate in the demolition of our own political order. To be sure, we might feel that we are doing nothing more than going along with everyone else. This is true, and it is what Arendt described as the de-evolution of a society into a mob. We can try to solve this problem individually by securing our own computers. We can also try to solve it collectively by supporting, for example, organizations that are concerned with human rights. Okay, this brings up a couple relevant things to me. The Lindsey Graham thing, right? The Lady G thing. He's not on our side. He's politically antithetical to everything that we're trying to accomplish and hold upright as a progressive nation, right? But it's like enticing and it's like seductive to latch onto that and go, oh, we're going to out him. We're going to expose him. We're going to humiliate him. And then we're going to defeat him. Rather than paying attention to the simple fact that his politics are unethical. He's like a little political lapdog to our president. And his self-interest in advancing his agenda and protecting himself through staying close to the president is despicable. It's kind of like the PP tape, right? If we could get footage of prostitutes peeing on our president, everything would be so much easier because we could point at them and laugh and go, oh, you're bad. You know, it's like it's already proven that shit doesn't work. The Access Hollywood tapes, Stormy Daniels, Melania, you get what I'm going after, right? We become the mob because we are looking at, it's like we're trying to use a totalitarian tactic to our advantage to take down a larger totalitarian force. Does that make sense? Am I hitting on something relevant here? And then, of course, hey, let's as far as like protecting ourselves and our private lives, maybe that's part of the reason why I don't feel like being so funny anymore, is because oftentimes comedy is like digging in deep and then vomiting out shit that maybe you haven't processed yet. Or part of the process is like processing it out loud. And, I like hiding in plain sight with these absurd characters that I do. And that's kind of one way to circumvent that. But like I've experimented and played with, like doing a one-man show or I talk about my life and stuff like that. And it's like, wait a minute. Maybe not all of this is for you. Maybe I'm teaching myself that like I can't just turn my life into fodder in the hopes that it makes you laugh or feel better. You know what I mean? And then, of course, I mean, like, how am I going to stop Verizon from knowing everything about me? Whatever. Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for donating to Project Okra. Thank you, Dust Fowl. Man, and thank you, Trash People. I like you guys. I feel like you've followed me for a long time. I just appreciation. Project Okra, Southern Roots Bakery, Walnuts, Water, Timothy Snyder, Skavlan, Kim Cattrall. Give it up for Kim Cattrall. Samantha. If you're a Samantha, I don't know, give an S in the chat room. Press S if you're a Samantha in the chat room. God bless you if you are. I know I'm not. Or am I? I don't know. I never really watched Sex and the City. All right. We're having fun. We're contributing to good causes. Okay, this is important. This is a good word. Be active in organizations, political or not, that express your own view of life. Pick a charity or two and set up an auto pay. Then you will have made a free choice that supports civil society and helps others to do good. It is gratifying to know that when whatever the course of events, you are helping others to do good. Many of us can afford to support some part of the vast network of charities that one of our former presidents called 1,000 points of light. Those points of light are best seen like stars at dusk against a darkening sky. When Americans think of freedom, we usually imagine a contest between a lone individual and a powerful government. We tend to conclude that the individual should be empowered and the government kept at bay. And that's all well and good, but one element of freedom is the choice of associates. And one defense of freedom is the activity of groups to sustain their members. This is why we should engage in activities that are of interest to us, our families, and our friends. These need not be expressly political. Václav Havel, the Czech dissident thinker, gave the example of brewing good beer. Insofar as we take pride in these activities and come to know others who do so as well, we are creating civil society. Sharing in an undertaking teaches us that we can trust people beyond a narrow circle of friends and families, and helps us to recognize authorities from whom we can learn. The capacity for trust and learning can make life seem less chaotic and mysterious, and democratic politics more plausible and attractive. The anti-communist dissidents of Eastern Europe, facing a situation more extreme than ours, recognized the seemingly non-political activity of civil society as an expression and a safeguard of freedom. And they were right. In the 20th century, all the major enemies of freedom were hostile to non-governmental organizations, charities, and the like. Communists require all such groups to be officially registered and transform them into institutions of control. Fascists created what they called a corporatist system in which every human activity had its proper place, subordinated to the party state. Today's authoritarians in India, Turkey, and Russia are also highly allergic to the idea of free associations and non-governmental organizations. All right. You know, I'm enjoying the discussion going on. Look, I'm not great with money, right? I'm a comedian. And I read a book. I try to read books about money every once in a while to get a little bit more, or save, or just be smarter about it. One simple math equation that works for me is 70-30. 70%, that's what I give myself to live on. And then the 30%, I split into tenths, right? So 10% goes into savings. 10% goes towards like capital. If I'm trying to like use money for my own like business kind of stuff. And then the last 10% goes towards charity. So it makes it very easy to, when I get a paycheck, just make it an automatic habit. 10% go towards an organization that I believe in, that I believe is doing good work. So there's a little tip for you. I don't know if you want to turn to me for economic advice, but hey, you're already here, right? Getting some political enlightenment from me. So you might as well take some economic enlightenment too. I don't know what you guys are talking about right now, but I like that you're talking. Okay. 16. Learn from peers in other countries. Keep up your friendships abroad or make new friends in other countries. Okay. The president, no, sorry. I'm getting a little fatigued. Let me try again, because this one feels important and this one feels possible. I was talking to someone from another country in this feed earlier today. Ali in Ireland. Shout out you. Chapter 16. Oh, you're in Australia. Wow. Thank you for being here. My goodness. Okay. Chapter 16. Learn from peers in other countries. Keep up your friendships abroad or make new friends in other countries. The present difficulties in the United States are an element of a larger trend, and no country is going to find a solution by itself. Make sure you and your family have passports. Okay. Didn't they stop giving out passports recently? Unless it's like a life or death thing. That's not, all right, if you got, okay. In the year before the president was elected, American journalists were often mistaken about his campaign. As he surmounted barrier after barrier and accumulated victory after victory, our commentariat assured us that the next stage he would be stopped by one fine American institution or another. There was, meanwhile, one group of observers who took a different position: East Europeans and those who study Eastern Europe. To them, much about the president's campaign was familiar, and the final outcome was no surprise. Ukrainian and Russian journalists who sniffed the air in the Midwest said more realistic things than American pollsters who had built careers on understanding the politics of their own country. To Ukrainians, Americans seemed comically slow to react to the obvious threats of cyber war and fake news. When Russian propaganda made Ukraine a target in 2013, young Ukrainian journalists and others reacted immediately, decisively, and sometimes humorously with campaigns to expose disinformation. Russia deployed many of the same techniques against Ukraine that it later used against the United States while invading Ukraine. When Russian media falsely claimed in 2014 that Ukrainian troops crucified a small boy, the Ukrainian response was rapid and effective, at least within Ukraine itself. When Russian media spread the story in 2016 that Hillary Clinton was ill because she mentioned an article on decision fatigue, which is not an illness, in an email, the story was spread by Americans. The Ukrainians won and the Americans lost in the sense that Russia failed to get the regime it wanted in its neighbor, but did see its preferred candidate triumph in the United States. This should give us pause. History, which for a time seemed to be running from east to west, now seems to be moving from, History, which for a time seemed to be moving from west to east, now seems to be moving from east to west. Everything has happened here seems to happen there first. The fact that most Americans do not have passports has become a problem for American democracy. Sometimes Americans say that they do not need travel documents because they prefer to die defending freedom in America. These are fine words, but they miss an important point. The fight will be a long one, even if it does require sacrifice. It first demands sustained attention to the world around us so that we know what we are resisting, and how best to do so. So having a passport is not a sign of surrender. On the contrary, it is liberating, since it creates the possibility of new experiences. It allows us to see how other people, sometimes wiser than we, react to similar problems. Since so much of what has happened in the last year is familiar to the rest of the world or from recent memory, we must observe and listen. All right. 17. Listen for dangerous words. Be alert to the use of the words extremism and terrorism. Be alive to the fatal notions of emergency and exception. Be angry about the treacherous use of patriotic vocabulary. The most intelligent of the Nazis, the legal theorist Carl Schmitt, explained in clear language the essence of fascist governance. The way to destroy all rules, he explained, was to focus on the idea of the exception. A Nazi leader outmaneuvers his opponents by manufacturing a general conviction that the present moment is exceptional, and then transforming that state of exception into a permanent emergency. Citizens then trade real freedom for fake safety. When politicians today invoke terrorism, they are speaking, of course, of an actual danger. But when they try to train us to surrender freedom in the name of safety, we should all be on guard. There is no necessary trade-off between the two. Sometimes we do indeed gain one by losing the other, and sometimes not. People who assure you that you can only gain security at the price of liberty usually want to deny you both. You can certainly concede freedom without becoming more secure. The feeling of submission to authority might be comforting, but it is not the same thing as actual safety. Likewise, gaining a bit of freedom may be unnerving, but this momentary unease is not dangerous. It is easy to imagine situations where we sacrifice both freedom and safety at the same time. When we enter an abusive relationship or vote for a fascist. Similarly, it is none too difficult to imagine choices that increase both freedom and safety, like leaving an abusive relationship or emigrating from a fascist state or defunding the NYPD. It is the government's job to increase both freedom and security. Extremism certainly sounds bad, and governments often try to make it sound worse by using the word terrorism in the same sentence. But the word has little meaning. There is no doctrine called extremism. When tyrants speak of extremists, they just mean people who are not in the mainstream, as the tyrants themselves are defining that mainstream at the particular moment. Dissidents of the 20th century, whether they were resisting fascism or communism, were called extremists. Modern authoritarian regimes, such as Russia, use laws on extremism to punish those who criticize their policies. In this way, the notion of extremism comes to mean virtually everything except what is, in fact, extreme: tyranny. Okay. Big coffee's all gone, guys. Okay, this is a big one. I like this one. You ready? Oh, you know what? I'm getting a call to stay hydrated, which I will. And you know what? Okay, I like seeing that people are ready in the chat. Yeah, that's a This is a swell. I'll tell the story about the swell another time. Real quickly, I'll tell you that I won a contest. And I got to go on a creative retreat led by the RZA of the Wu-Tang Clan. And it was a big deal. It still is a big deal in my life that I got to do that. And so every time I sip water and nourish my body with this swell, I feel swell. Swell if you want to throw some money at us, or if you just want to donate money to the Okra project. Come on. Tazo T, swell, RZA. Let's feed some people who need our help. Okay? Guys, remember, be calm when the unthinkable arrives. Be calm when the unthinkable arrives. How much wisdom did you bestow upon the RZA? I did not bestow very much wisdom upon the RZA, okay? I got an opportunity to present a 60-second presentation of who I am to the RZA. I'm a comedy clowny kind of guy, so I got to break up the room, and a lot of the heavy energy and the serious energy was something goofy, and I was recognized by him for that, and the necessity for humor in those spaces. So I felt very honored and privileged that I could do that for the very special group of people there. But it was mostly the RZA bestowing knowledge upon us, and then we broke off and okay, look, we're doing something else here. I'm getting sidetracked. I want to thank you guys for staying with me. And let's remember, be calm when the unthinkable arrives. Modern tyranny is terror management. When the terrorist attack comes, remember that authoritarians exploit such events in order to consolidate power. The sudden disaster that requires the end of checks and balances, the dissolution of opposition parties, the suspension of freedom of expression, the right to a fair trial, and so on, is the oldest trick in the Hitlerian book. Do not fall for it. In the chat, can we how do you stay calm? What's one? You guys know that I like breathing. You know that I like drinking water. I like meditating, eating good food that doesn't fuck you up too bad. It's good to catalog ways to stay calm. And even look into the science of why and how these things actually keep you calm. Something to think about. All right. Guys, back to it. The Reichstag fire was the moment when Hitler's government, which came to power mainly through democratic means, became the menacingly permanent Nazi regime. It is the archetype of terror management. On February 27th, 1933, at about 9 p.m., the building housing the German parliament, the Reichstag, began to burn. But who set fire to that night in Berlin? We don't know. And it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the spectacular act of terror initiated the politics of emergency. Gazing with pleasure at the flames that night, Hitler said, "This fire is just the beginning." Whether or not the Nazis set the fire, Hitler saw the political opportunity. There will be no mercy now. Anyone standing in our way will be cut down. The next day, a decree suspended the basic rights of all German citizens, allowing them to be preventatively detained by the police. On the strength of Hitler's claim that the fire was on the work of Germany's enemies, the Nazi Party won a decisive victory in parliamentary elections on March 5th. The police and the Nazi paramilitaries began to round up members of left-wing political parties and place them in improvised concentration camps. On March 23rd, the new parliament passed an enabling act, which allowed Hitler to rule by decree. Germany then remained in a state of emergency for the next 12 years until the end of the Second World War. Hitler had used an act of terror, an event of limited inherent significance, to institute a regime of terror that killed millions of people and changed the world. The authoritarians of today are also terror managers, and if anything, they are rather more creative. Consider the current Russian regime, so admired by the president. Putin not only came to power in an incident that strikingly resembled the Reichstag fire, he then used a series of terror attacks, real, questionable, and fake, to remove obstacles to total power in Russia and to assault democratic neighbors. When Putin was appointed prime minister by a failing Boris Yeltsin in August 99, he was an unknown with a nugatory approval rating. Nugatory. I guess that's only a nug of approval. The following month, a series of buildings were bombed in Russian cities, apparently by the Russian secret police. Its officers were arrested by their own colleagues with evidence of their guilt. In another case, the Speaker of the Russian parliament announced an explosion a few days before it took place. Nonetheless, Putin declared a war of revenge against Russia's Muslim population in Chechnya, promising to pursue the supposed perpetrators and rub them out in the shithouse. Thank you for putting Nugatory up. Jess, thank you so much. Everyone, please appreciate Jess and Hex for staying on this entire time while I do this. This was totally my idea to sit here and read a book the entire time, and it is their generosity and professionalism that keeps this stream going. So thank you to them. And I don't know when we're going to return to a Planet Scum economic model where money won't be 100% sent to a charity, but we got to get these folks paid because they're doing me and hopefully you guys a real service by being here for me and you guys. So thank you, Jess and Hex. Back to Russia's manufactured terrorist attacks that resulted in an emergency state. And okay, the Russian nation rallied. Putin's approval rating skyrocketed. The following March, he won presidential elections. In 2002, after Russian security forces killed scores of Russian civilians while suppressing a real terrorist attack at a Moscow theater, Putin exploited the occasion to seize control of private television. After a school in Beslan was besieged by terrorists in 2004, in strange circumstances that suggested provocation, Putin did away with the position of elected regional governors. Thus, Putin's rise to power and his elimination of two major institutions, private television and elected regional governorships, were enabled by the management of real, fake, and questionable terrorism. Side note, if you'd like to read more about these terrorist attacks and Putin's rise to power, I would recommend a book called The Man with No Face. It's by a journalist named Masha Gessen. It goes into greater detail about the history of Putin. Anyway, after Putin returned to the presidency in 2012, Russia introduced terror management into its foreign policy. In its invasion of Ukraine in 2014, Russia transformed units of its own regular army into a terrorist force, removing insignia from uniforms, and denying all responsibility for the dreadful suffering they inflicted. In campaign for the Donbas region in southeastern Ukraine, Russia deployed Chechen irregulars and sent units of its regular army based in Muslim regions to join the invasion. Russia also tried but failed to hack the 2014 Ukrainian presidential elections. In April 2015, Russian hackers took over the transmission of a French television station, pretended to be ISIS, then broadcast material designed to terrorize France. Russia impersonated a cyber caliphate so that the French would fear terror more than they already did. The aim was presumably to drive voters to the far-right National Front, a party financially supported by Russia. After 130 people were killed and 368 injured in the terrorist attack on Paris in November 2015, the founder of a think tank close to the Kremlin rejoiced that terrorism would drive Europe toward fascism and Russia. Both fake and real Islamic terrorism in Western Europe, in other words, were thought to be in the Russian interest. In early 2016, Russia manufactured a moment of fake terror in Germany. While bombing Syrian civilians and thus driving Muslim refugees to Europe, Russia exploited a family drama to instruct Germans that Muslims were rapists of children. The aim again seems to have been to destabilize a democratic system and promote the parties of the extreme right. The previous September, the German government had announced that it would take 500,000 refugees from the war in Syria. Russia then began a bombing campaign in Syria that targeted civilians. Having provided the refugees, Russia then supplied the narrative. In January 2016, the Russian mass media spread a story that a girl of Russian origin in Germany who had momentarily gone missing had been serially raped by Muslim immigrants. With suspicious alacrity, let's put up the definition of that word, alacrity, A-L-A-C-R-I-T-Y. With suspicious alacrity, right-wing organizations in Germany organized protests against the government. When the local police informed the population that no such rape had taken place, Russian media accused them of a cover-up. Even Russian diplomats joined the spectacle. When the American president and his national security advisor speak of fighting terrorism alongside Russia, what they are proposing to the American people is terror management. Alacrity, yes. The brisk and cheerful readiness. All right. I got distracted by my own alacrity to define that word. Okay. When American president, my God, I'm losing it. Okay. Power through this. When the American president and his national security advisor speak of fighting terrorism alongside Russia, what they are proposing to the American people is terror management, the exploitation of real, dubious, and simulated terror attacks to bring down democracy. The Russian recap of the first telephone call between President and Vladimir Putin is telling. The two men, quote, shared the opinion that it is necessary to join forces against the common enemy number one, international terrorism and extremism, end quote. For tyrants, the lesson of the Reichstag fire is that one moment of shock enables an eternity of submission. For us, the lesson is that our natural fear and grief must not enable the destruction of our institutions. Courage does not mean not fearing or not grieving. It does not mean recognizing and resisting terror management right away from the moment of the attack, precisely when it seems most difficult to do so. James Madison nicely made the point that tyranny arises on some favorable emergency. After the Reichstag fire, Hannah Arendt wrote that I was no longer of the opinion that one can simply be a bystander. Let's see. I want to thank my Australian friend, Yoni, for being here. Good night. God, yeah, thank you. All the way to 4 a.m. Yeah, just thank you. We're almost done here, folks. We're at 19. Be a patriot. Personally, being a patriot is something that I struggle with, I think because patriotism gets misconstrued as loving your country no matter what, right? Try to think of your country as a family member. And if your family member is sick or saying something you don't like, you wouldn't just unconditionally love them, but you would hopefully try to encourage them or find a way to help them heal, right? I think that's more in line with patriotism than just a kind of lockstep agreement. I hope. Okay. 19. Be a patriot. Set a good example of what America means for the generations to come. They will need it. What is patriotism? Let us begin with what patriotism is not. It is not patriotic to dodge the draft and to mock war heroes and their families. It is not patriotic to discriminate against active duty members of the armed forces in one's companies or to campaign to keep disabled veterans away from one's property. It is not patriotic to compare one's search for sexual partners in New York with the military service in Vietnam that one has dodged. It is not patriotic to avoid paying taxes, especially when American working families do pay. It is not patriotic to ask those working, tax-paying American families to finance one's own presidential campaign and then to spend their contributions in one's own companies. And we all know these are things that our president has done. It is not patriotic to admire foreign dictators. It is not patriotic to cultivate a relationship with Muammar Gaddafi or to say that Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin are superior leaders. It is not patriotic to call upon Russia to intervene in an American presidential election. It is not patriotic to cite Russian propaganda at rallies. It is not patriotic to share an advisor with Russian oligarchs. It is not patriotic to solicit foreign policy advice for someone who owns shares in a Russian energy company. It's not patriotic to read a foreign policy speech written by someone on the payroll of a Russian energy company. It's not patriotic to appoint a national security advisor who has taken money from a Russian propaganda organ. It's not patriotic to appoint a Secretary of State, at some point as Secretary of State, an oil man with Russian financial interests who is the director of Russian American Energy Company and has received the Order of Friendship from Putin. The point is not that Russia and America must be enemies. The point is that patriotism involves serving your own country. The president is a nationalist, which is not at all the same thing as a patriot. A nationalist encourages us to be our worst and then tells us that we are the best. A nationalist, although endlessly brooding on power, victory, defeat, revenge, wrote Orwell, tends to be uninterested in what happens in the real world. Nationalism is relativist, since the only truth is the resentment we feel when we contemplate others. As the novelist Danilo Keys put it, nationalism has no universal values, aesthetic or ethical. No, sorry, I'm going to reread that because I got the emphasis wrong. As the novelist Danilo Keys put it, nationalism has no values, aesthetic or ethical. A patriot, by contrast, wants the nation to live up to its ideals, which means asking us to be our best selves. A patriot must be concerned with the real world, which is the only place where his country can be loved and sustained. A patriot has universal values, standards by which he judges his nation, always wishing it well and wishing that it would do better. Democracy failed in Europe in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and it is failing not only in much of Europe, but in many parts of the world today. It is that history and experience that reveals to us the dark range of our possible futures. A nationalist will say that it can't happen here, which is the first step towards disaster. A patriot says that it could happen here, but that we will stop it. All right. Here we go, guys. Number 20. Be as courageous as you can. Which I just, one more point before I read this, and maybe we'll do a little talking earlier. or later. Maybe I'm brain dead. Look, I'm not that smart. I'm not a historian. I'm not an expert. But look, it's important to absorb. And I think I have been complicit in just absorbing only material from my feed, from the screen. And any time that I pick up a book, whether I disagree with it or not, I feel nourished, I feel fed, and I feel like I've learned something. And I'm trying to make a better habit out of reading just because we don't do that a lot anymore. There's something more mesmerizing, more distracting, more appetizing out there in the form of scandal and just like instantaneous entertainment mixed with news. Just hopefully we can cultivate a little bit more patience and attention and certainly courage in the form of knowing that, like, look, we're not experts, but it really is, we are responsible for our own growth. We are responsible for picking up a book, even though the phone is more fun. Recently, I can't remember where, I read a quote saying that it's important to understand the difference between fun and happiness. And I think a lot of times I pick up my phone for fun. It's not even really fun, but it's just kind of like a numb fun that feels okay. It's not the same heavy lifting as reading a book. And so even though my voice is straining and I'm self-conscious about this not being entertaining and cool, I still wanted to do this. And I thank you for joining me. And I'm open to suggestion about a different book. If it's something small and readable, easily digestible for me to speed read over the 3 hours we've been doing this. Yeah. Angela Davis, bell hooks. I would love to. Cool. So guys, thank you for being here. I'll do the last one. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you. Okay. So, and please donate to the Okra project. I trust that you've already done that. Unfortunately, we don't have a marker for knowing how much has been donated through this event. But, I saw that, Elena Doe made a $25 donation. I saw another generous person did a $30 donation. And it's a good time to help out people that we know need it. Black trans people are at that intersection of persecution that is just harrowing and lethal right now. So anything we can do to bring them some comfort, some nourishment, and some reassurance that we are here for them is, in a small way, a quiet, powerful thing to do. So thank you for participating. And I'll be sure, as soon as this ends, to donate as well. Okay. Be as courageous as you can. If none of us prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny. Yay! Oh, that's it. That was the chapter. Be as courageous as you can. If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will live under tyranny. Well, I guess I'll just read the epilogue. But before that, I'll just say this. Courage, reading, learning, empathy, optimism, curiosity. These are all muscles. These are all things that grow with exercise and practice. Something that I've been very interested in the last few years is the concept of neuroplasticity. I learned this through a meditation course where your brain is plastic. It adapts, it develops, but it also, when you think certain thoughts, when you practice certain things repeatedly, you start digging these trenches, these neural pathways that get clearer and deeper the more you do them. So if there's something you admire, if there's a quality you admire that maybe you want to express or experience more often in your life, you practice it. It's not going to come to you right away. You know, when you were a little baby and you learned to tie your shoes, it was hard. And then you do it every day. And now you can do it without thinking about it. You speak without having to so effortfully conjure every word. You pick up your phone and you go to the app because you do it all the time. Things become easy because you do them. So you want to be a more peaceful person. You want to be a more active person. You want to be a more curious person. Practice it every day. Practicing courage is one of the hardest things to do. I know I could be doing that more often. You know, maybe this is part of that. It's not that this was not that hard, but it was a choice. John Robert Wilson, hi. Thank you for being here. We just finished a book together. All right. This is the epilogue. And then I would recommend, if you can, if you're feeling healthy, you're feeling safe, put on a mask, go for a walk. Walk, you know, with your heart. Lead with your heart. Okay. Let's see. This is the epilogue. History and liberty. In Shakespeare's drama Hamlet, the hero is a virtuous man who is rightly shocked by the abrupt rise of an evil ruler. Haunted by visions, overcome by nightmares, lonely and estranged, he feels that he must reconstruct his sense of time. The time is out of joint, says Hamlet. Oh, cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. Our time is certainly out of joint. We have forgotten history for one reason, and if we are not careful, we will neglect it for another. We will have to repair our own sense of time if we wish to renew our commitment to liberty. Until recently, we Americans had convinced ourselves that there was nothing in the future but more of the same. The seemingly distant traumas of fascism, Nazism, and communism seemed to be receding into irrelevance. We allowed ourselves to accept the politics of inevitability, the sense that history could move in only one direction, towards liberal democracy. After communism in Eastern Europe came to an end in 1989 through 91, we imbibed the myth of an end of history. In doing so, we lowered our defenses, constrained our imagination, and opened the way for precisely the kinds of regimes we told ourselves could never return. To be sure, the politics of inevitability seem at first glance to be a kind of history. Inevitability politicians do not deny that there is a past, a present, and a future. They even allow for the colorful variety of the distant past. Yet they portray the present simply as a step towards a future that we already know, one of expanding globalization, deepening reason, and growing prosperity. This is what is called a teleology, a narration of time that leads towards a certain, usually undesirable goal. Communism also offered a teleology, promising an inevitable socialist utopia. When that story was shattered a quarter century ago, we drew the wrong conclusion. Rather than rejecting teleologies, we imagined that our own story was true. The politics of inevitability is a self-induced intellectual coma. So long as there was a contest between communist and capitalist systems, and so long as the memory of fascism and Nazism was alive, Americans had to pay some attention to history and preserve the concepts that allowed them to imagine alternative futures. Yet once we accepted the politics of inevitability, we assumed that history was no longer relevant. If everything in the past is governed by a known tendency, then there is no need to learn the details. The acceptance of inevitability stilted the way we talked about politics in the 21st century. It stifled policy debate and tended to generate party systems where one political party defended the status quo while the other proposed total negation. We learned to say that there was no alternative to the basic order of things, a sensibility that the Lithuanian political theorist Leonidas Donskis called liquid evil. One inevitability was taken for granted. Criticism indeed became slippery. What appeared to be critical analysis often assumed that the status quo could not actually change and thereby indirectly reinforced it. Some spoke critically of neoliberalism, the sense that the idea of the free market has somehow crowded out all others. This was true enough, but the very use of the word was usually a kowtow before an unchangeable hegemony. Other critics spoke for the need for disruption, borrowing a term from the analysis of technological innovations. When applied to politics, it again carries the implication that nothing can really change, that the chaos that excites us will eventually be absorbed by a self-regulating system. The man who runs naked across a football field certainly disrupts, but he does not change the rules of the game. The whole notion of disruption is adolescent. It assumes that after the teenagers make a mess, the adults will come clean it up. But there are no adults. We own this mess. The second anti-historical way of considering the past is the politics of eternity. Like the politics of inevitability, the politics of eternity performs a masquerade of history, though a different one. It is concerned with the past, but in a self-absorbed way, free of any concern with facts. Its mood is a longing for past moments that never really happened during epochs that were, in fact, disastrous. Eternity politicians bring us the past as a vast, misty courtyard of illegible monuments to national victimhood, all of them equally distant from the present, all of them equally accessible for manipulation. Every reference to the past seems to involve an attack by some external enemy upon the purity of the nation. National populists are eternity politicians. Their preferred reference point is the era when democratic republics seemed vanquished and their Nazi and Soviet rivals unstoppable, the 1930s. Those who advocated Brexit, the departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union, imagined a British nation state, though such a thing never existed. There was a British Empire, then there was Britain as a member of the European Union. The move to separate from the EU is not a step backwards onto firm ground, but a leap into the unknown. Eerily, when judges said that a parliamentary vote was required for Brexit, a British tabloid called them enemies of the people, a Stalinist term from the show trials of the 1930s. The National Front in France urges voters to reject Europe in the name of an imaginary pre-war French nation state. But France, like Britain, has never existed without either an empire or a European project. Leaders of Russia, Poland, and Hungary alike make similar gestures towards a glowing image of the 1930s. In his 2016 campaign, the American president used the slogan "America First," which is the name of a committee that sought to prevent the United States from opposing Nazi Germany. The president strategic advisor promises policies that will be as exciting as the 1930s. When exactly was the again in the president's slogan, "Make America Great Again"? Hint, it is the same again that we find in "Never Again." The president himself has described a regime change in the style of the 30s as the solution to the problems of the president. You know what solves it? When the economy crashes, when the country goes to total hell and everything is a disaster. What we need, he thinks, are riots to go back to where we used to be when we were great. In the politics of eternity, The seduction by a mythicized past prevents us from thinking about possible futures. The habit of dwelling on victimhood dulls the impulse of self-correction. Since the nation is defined by its inherent virtue rather than by its future potential, politics becomes a discussion of good and evil rather than a discussion of possible solutions to real problems. Since the crisis is permanent, the sense of emergency is always present. Planning for the future seems impossible or even disloyal. How can we even think of reform when the enemy is always at the gate? If the politics of inevitability is like a coma, the politics of eternity is like hypnosis. We stare at the spinning vortex of cyclical myth until we fall into a trance, and then we do something shocking at someone else's orders. The danger we now face is of a passage of the politics of inevitability to the politics of eternity, from a naive and flawed sort of democratic republic to a confused and cynical sort of fascist oligarchy. The politics of inevitability is terribly vulnerable to the kind of shock it has just received. When something shatters the myth, when our time falls out of joint, we scramble to find some other way to organize what we experience. The path of least resistance leads directly from inevitability to eternity. If you once believed that everything always turns out well in the end, you can be persuaded that nothing turns out well in the end. If you once did nothing because you thought progress is inevitable, then you can continue to do nothing because you think time moves in repeating cycles. Both of these positions, inevitability and eternity, are anti-historical. The only thing that stands between them is history itself. History allows us to see patterns and make judgments. It sketches for us the structures within which we can seek freedom. It reveals moments, each one of them different, none entirely unique. To understand one moment is to see the possibility of being the co-creator of another. History permits us to be responsible, not for everything, but for something. The Polish poet Czesław Miłosz thought that such a notion of responsibility worked against loneliness and indifference. History gives us company of those who have done and suffered more than we have. By embracing the politics of inevitability, we raised a generation without history. How will these young Americans react now that the promise of inevitability has been so obviously broken? Perhaps they will slide from inevitability towards eternity. It must be hoped that they could instead become a historical generation, rejecting the traps of inevitability and eternity that older generations have laid before them. One thing is certain. If young people do not begin to make history, politicians of eternity and inevitability will destroy it. And to make history, young Americans will have to know some. This is not the end, but a beginning. Time is out of joint, O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. Thus Hamlet. Yet he includes, nay, come, let's go together. It's all at once a scary and a very encouraging time because people are coming together to realize that history is in our hands and that it's not static. It's not hypothetical. It's sobering to hold something so heavy in our hands, right? To realize that the responsibility is great, is immediate, and is available to us. It was only weeks ago that we thought of something like police as inevitable and eternal. But if we look at history, we know that police isn't eternal. It started as something much more dastardly and unethical, right? And then it evolved and evolved and evolved. And we can follow that history. We can know that history. And a historic moment like the rebellions in Minneapolis and the towering flames of that police precinct unlocked something and made us realize that maybe there is a different way forward. It's just a small example, but like, read the opinion piece in the New York Times from yesterday about police abolition. People have been doing this work, and now it's got greater momentum than ever before in America because people are more cognizant of the history in our lifetime of police, of the last century of police, and that things change. And that if we take responsibility for that change, we can oversee a change that we are happy with, that we are content with, that we are in charge of, right? Look, once again, I'm not that smart. I was just reading a book. I'm an actor. This is a little script. It's a little play. I absorbed some of it. I understood some of it, not all of it, but it's important practice. Look, I'm an actor, right? Act. To act is to do. So, if I'm doing a scene where I'm mad, and I got to be mad, I'm going to be mad. But like, part of that comes from a real place inside, and part of that just comes from what I'm getting from the material. And so, look, I may not fully absorb everything I read, but practicing here and now, doing something with you, reading this, holding myself accountable to reading something that allows me to think these thoughts and express them is a good feeling. And I don't know, it's different than just scrolling, and it's different than just feeling sad that the world is so big and so heavy that nothing can ever be done. We're seeing things being done by very brave, very smart people in the streets, solidarity and strength to protesters fighting against tyranny right now. And thank you all for coming together for a good cause, raising money for some of the most at-risk, persecuted people on the planet today. Donate to the Okra Project again and again. You can set up an auto pay. You can make a little budget for yourself. You can seek out other practical and compassionate charities to give to. And practice. 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 It gets easier the more you do it. Practice reading, practice thinking, and maybe practice going outside if you can be safe today. Let's see, I'm getting a message here. Whew. Okay, yeah, Jess a while ago asked me if I'm holding up okay 2.5 hours in. I feel good. Maybe I got to drink some tea or something. But man, not comedic, but look, I'd like, some aspirational figure that keeps popping into my mind lately is Charlie Chaplin, right? And he was, when he made The Great Dictator, a master of his physical comedy, but also a master of being able to capture a very important point of view at the time. I don't think I'm there. It may take me, it's going to take a lot of practice for me to just selfishly look at Klon and just there's the grains of, saying that billionaires are bad and that, joy is more subversive than hate, right? like injecting my little point of view in there every once in a while. I got a lot of work to do. I got a lot of practice to practice. And maybe this is part of that. I don't know if anything ever funny or googy is going to come out of, like, I don't know what kind of protest song Vacation Jason's ever going to write, but I feel supported by you. I feel emboldened to do this again sometime. We'll look for another thing to read together. Maybe it'll be the book club. Maybe it'll be Googy Morning. I don't know when Vacation Jason's going to do another episode. Maybe he'll read. I don't know. But this felt good. And thank you. And let's see. Saturdays at 11. That's when we're doing this. And I don't know. I don't want to leave. I love you guys. Thank you. Southern Roots Bakery, Black-owned vegan bakery, delivering red velvet glazed and lemon drop donuts right to your door. Thank you guys. I think we're going to end the broadcast now. Okay, yeah. Once more, just plugging Project Okra. Last time, $90 feeds a Black trans person in their own home with organic, healthy food. Food, nourishment, healing. Okay, signing off. Thank you. Go for a walk. Have a great day.